The wind screamed like a living thing. Alara Quinn had stopped feeling her fingers an hour ago. Maybe two. Time had become as meaningless as direction in the whiteout that surrounded her. A wall of snow so dense she couldn't see her own hands when she held them before her face. Each step forward was an act of faith or desperation. She no longer knew which. Her boots, thin-soled and city-made, had given up their fight against the cold miles back. Ice had worked its way through the cracks, turning her feet into blocks of burning numbness. The cloak she'd grabbed during her escape, her father's old hunting cloak, ironically, was frozen stiff, offering about as much warmth as a shroud. Appropriate, she thought with bitter clarity. Since I'm already dead. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it brought a strange calm. Death in the storm was still better than what she'd left behind. Better than him. Marcus Thorne. Even his name tasted like poison in her mind. The land baron who'd smiled at her across her father's gambling table 3 nights ago, his eyes calculating her value like she was livestock. The man who'd produced a contract, legal, binding, stamped with the territorial seal, that transferred ownership of one Alara Margaret Quinn to settle the debts of her worthless father. Ownership. The word had stolen the breath from her lungs then, and it haunted every step she took now. In 1887, in this godforsaken corner of the Montana Territory, apparently such contracts still held weight. Women could be traded like horses, like property, like things, if the debt was large enough and the debtor desperate enough. Her father had been both. Alara's boot caught on something buried beneath the snow, a root, a rock she'd never know. And she went down hard. Her palms hit the frozen ground, and the impact sent a jolt of pain up her arms that told her she wasn't quite as numb as she'd thought. She tried to push herself up. Her arms trembled, gave out. The snow beneath her cheek felt almost warm. She knew what that meant. Hypothermia was stealing her last defenses, making death seem like comfort. "Get up," she commanded herself. "Get up, you stupid girl. You didn't run this far to die within sight of—" But there was nothing in sight, just endless white. She didn't even know if she was still heading away from Thorne's men or if she'd turned in circles. The blizzard had swallowed all landmarks hours ago. Her eyes drifted closed. Maybe just for a moment, just to rest. Then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A creak, wood against wood. A door? Her eyes snapped open. Through the swirling snow, perhaps 20 yards ahead, a shape emerged from the white. Dark timber. A peaked roof buckling under snow. A cabin. No. It could be a trap. It could be Thorne's men. It could be hunters who'd sell her location for a handful of coins. Every instinct screamed not to trust it, but her body had made its own decision. She found herself crawling forward, hands clawing through snow, knees dragging trenches. The cabin grew larger, more solid, real. A window glowed with firelight, actual warmth, actual shelter. She reached the door, raised one frozen fist, hammered against the wood with what little strength remained. "Please," she whispered, though she knew no one could hear her over the wind. "Please." The door didn't open. She hit it again, harder, scraping her knuckles raw against the rough timber. "Please, I'm—" Her vision tunneled, the world tilted sideways. She felt herself falling, felt the door frame rush past her face, felt the snow rise up to claim her. The last thing she registered before darkness took her was the door finally opening, golden light spilling across the white, and a man's voice cutting through the storm. Jesus Christ. She woke to fire. Not consuming her, warming her. The crackle of logs, the glow of flame against closed eyelids. Alara's consciousness returned in fragments, sensation before thought, warmth against her skin, the weight of blankets, the smell of wood smoke and something cooking. She tried to move. Her body felt like it belonged to someone else, heavy and unresponsive. When she finally managed to open her eyes, the room swam into view slowly. Low ceiling, stone fireplace, rough-hewn walls, animal pelts hanging from hooks, a pot suspended over the fire, steam rising, a cabin. She'd made it to a cabin. Easy. The voice came from her left. Alara's head turned, too fast, sending a wave of dizziness through her skull, and she found herself looking at a man seated in a wooden chair a few feet from the bed. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples, and a beard that spoke of months without trimming. His face was hard-planed and weather-beaten, the kind of face carved by years of mountain winters. But his eyes, watching her with careful assessment, held something unexpected. Concern. "Don't try to sit up yet," he said. His voice was low, rough from disuse. "You're lucky you've still got all your toes. Another hour in that storm, and lucky wouldn't have been enough." Alara's throat felt like sandpaper. "Where—" The word came out as a croak. "My cabin. 3 miles south of the Blackstone Ridge, middle of nowhere. Exactly how I like it." He stood, moving to a shelf where he retrieved a tin cup. "Drink this. Slow." He knelt beside the bed. She was on an actual bed, she realized, not the floor, and held the cup to her lips. Warm water with honey. She managed 3 sips before he pulled it back. "More in a minute. Your body needs to remember how this works." He set the cup aside and studied her face. "I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and I need you to answer them honestly, because your answers determine what happens next. Understood?" Alara managed a small nod. "Good. First, are you running from something or to something?" "From." "Second, is what you're running from going to show up at my door with weapons?" She hesitated, nodded again. Something flickered in his eyes, not fear, but a kind of grim resignation. "Third question, and this is the important one. Did you commit a crime that justifies them hunting you?" "No." Her voice was stronger now, fueled by anger at the memory. "I ran. That's all. I ran." "From what?" "From being property." The words hung in the air between them. The man's expression didn't change, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He stood, walked to the fire, and stood there with his back to her for a long moment. "Your name?" he asked without turning. "Alara Quinn." "I'm Rowan Hale. This is my land, my cabin, my rules. You understand?" "Yes." "Rule 1. You're not property here, not mine, not anyone's. Whatever legal document says otherwise can burn with the rest of the firewood." He turned to face her then, and the firelight cast sharp shadows across his features. "Rule 2. If men come here claiming you, they deal with me first. I don't care what papers they wave around." Alara felt something crack open in her chest, something that had been locked tight since the moment her father told her about the contract. "Why would you?" "Because 10 years ago, someone helped me when they didn't have to, gave me a second chance when the world said I didn't deserve one." His voice was flat, factual. "I can't pay that debt back to them anymore. Maybe I can pay it forward." He moved back to the shelf, pulling down dried meat and a small loaf of bread. "You'll stay here until the storm breaks and you're strong enough to travel. Then we'll figure out where you can go that's safe. Until then, you eat, you rest, you heal." "Questions?" "Why are you alone out here?" It was a risk, asking. She knew that even in her weakened state. But something about his carefully maintained isolation, the way he spoke of helping someone in the past, the shadows that lived in his eyes, it spoke of a story, and she needed to know if she could trust it. Rowan's hand paused over the bread. "Because everyone I loved is dead, and society decided I was responsible. They were wrong, but their opinion still stood." He sliced the bread with a knife that looked sharp enough to split hairs. "I came to these mountains 6 years ago to be alone with my failures. Found out solitude suits me better than I expected." "I'm sorry for intruding on it." "You're not an intrusion." He brought the food to her, helped her sit up against the wall. "You're a person in need. There's a difference." He placed the plate in her lap. "Eat slowly. Your stomach won't thank you if you don't." Alara took a small bite of bread. It tasted better than anything she'd eaten in days, weeks maybe. "They'll come," she said quietly. "Marcus Thorne. His men. They'll track me here. I expected as much when I pulled you inside." Rowan settled back into his chair. "Storms bought you maybe 2 days. After that, they'll be able to move again." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "So here's what you need to tell me. Exactly who's coming, what they want, and what legal ground they think they're standing on. I need to know what we're up against." The fact that he said "we're" wasn't lost on her. Alara set down the bread, her appetite suddenly gone despite her body's hunger. "Marcus Thorne owns half the territory west of the Clearwater River, land, lumber mills, 3 silver mines. Men call him the king of the frontier. Her hands clenched in the blanket. My father, Thomas Quinn, he was a businessman, importer. He dealt in fine goods from the East, selling to the wealthy settlements. Was? Still is, technically, but he's also a drunk and a gambling addict who bet away everything we had, including his daughter. The bitterness in her voice could have stripped paint. 3 months ago, he borrowed money from Thorne, $20,000. Said he had a deal coming that would pay it back triple. The deal fell through. The money was gone. Rowan's expression remained neutral, but she saw his fingers tighten on the arm of the chair. And Thorne called in the debt. Worse, he showed up at our house with a lawyer and a document that would have made Lucifer himself proud. Alara's voice dropped. A labor contract. 7 years of domestic service to settle the debt. It was legal, witnessed, stamped by the territorial magistrate. My father had signed it. He'd signed away me, his own daughter, without even telling me. 7 years, Rowan's voice was dangerously quiet. I didn't understand at first. I thought it was just work. Housekeeping, maybe cooking. But then Thorne explained what domestic service meant in his household. She forced herself to meet Rowan's eyes. I'd live in his house, obey his commands, and fulfill whatever duties he required, with no right to refuse, no right to leave, and no legal recourse for anything he decided those duties should include. The temperature in the cabin seemed to drop 10 degrees despite the fire. You're telling me, Rowan said slowly, that in 1887 in United States territory, a man can legally purchase a woman? Not purchase, contract. There's apparently a legal distinction that makes it permissible. Alara's laugh was harsh. Debt bondage, they call it. It's not slavery. Oh no, that's illegal. But if you owe someone enough money, and you're desperate enough to sign the right papers, you can trade away your own freedom, or someone else's. Rowan stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Snow still battered the glass, the storm showing no signs of letting up. Your father signed. My father sold me to save his own skin. Thorne was going to have him arrested for fraud otherwise. This way, he clears the debt and keeps his freedom. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself. I found out 2 days before Thorne was supposed to collect me. My father told me over breakfast like he was announcing a change in dinner plans. And you ran. Took what I could carry and climbed out my bedroom window at midnight. I knew Thorne would send men after me. The contract included a recovery clause. If I ran, he had the legal right to pursue and return me. Like a runaway horse. Rowan turned from the window. How many men? I saw 4 following me when I left town. Could be more now. She met his steady gaze. They'll have guns, horses, legal authority, and they won't stop. Men like Thorne don't accept losing what they believe they own. He doesn't own you. The law says otherwise. Then the law is wrong. Rowan crossed his arms, his expression set like stone. And I've spent 6 years not giving a damn what the law says about anything. Not planning to start now. Despite everything, the cold still lingering in her bones, the fear coiled in her gut, the impossible situation bearing down on them both, Alara felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in days. Hope, maybe. Or just the relief of not being alone anymore. You don't know what you're offering, she said. Defying a man like Thorne, it could cost you everything. Rowan's smile was grim. Miss Quinn, I already lost everything. There's a certain freedom in having nothing left to lose. He moved back to his chair, the wood creaking under his weight. Besides, I built this cabin with my own hands, on land I claimed and worked and defended. Out here, my word is law. And my word says you're under my protection until you're ready to leave of your own choice. They might kill you. They might try. He said it so matter-of-factly that it took her a moment to register the weight of the statement. I've been expecting to die out here for 6 years, Miss Quinn. If it happens defending someone instead of alone in my sleep, I'd call that an improvement. Alara studied him. This hard, haunted man who'd pulled her from a storm and was now prepared to stand between her and armed men with legal authority. What happened to your family? She asked quietly. You said everyone you loved died. The shutters came down behind his eyes. That's a story for another time. Maybe never. He stood again, clearly done with the conversation. Rest now. The storm won't break for hours yet, and you need your strength. Rowan, sleep, Miss Quinn. We'll face what's coming when it arrives. Until then, you're safe. She wanted to argue, to press for more answers, to understand this man who'd become her unlikely savior. But exhaustion was pulling at her, heavy and insistent. The warmth of the fire, the weight of the blankets, the knowledge that, at least for this moment, she wasn't running anymore. Her eyes drifted closed. "Thank you," she whispered. She didn't hear if he responded. Sleep claimed her too quickly. The storm broke on the third day. Alara woke to sunlight streaming through the cabin window, pale winter sunlight, but sunlight nonetheless. The constant howl of wind had given way to an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional crack of ice falling from the eaves. She sat up slowly, testing her body's responses. The bone-deep cold had finally retreated, leaving only a residual ache in her joints. Her fingers and toes, which Rowan had checked religiously for frostbite, tingled with restored circulation but remained intact. Her strength was returning, fed by 3 days of hot food, warm shelter, and uninterrupted rest. The cabin was empty. Rowan's coat was gone from its hook by the door. Alara rose, wrapped one of the blankets around herself, and moved to the window. The world outside was transformed, a crystalline landscape of white, the snow piled in drifts higher than her waist in places. Trees sagged under the weight of ice. The sun reflecting off the pristine surface was almost blinding, and in the distance she could see a figure moving. Rowan, checking what looked like a small stable she hadn't noticed before. He disappeared inside, then emerged leading a horse, a sturdy mountain breed with a shaggy winter coat. He was preparing for something. The door opened a few minutes later, bringing a gust of cold air with it. Rowan stamped snow from his boots and closed the door behind him. "You're up," he observed, hanging his coat. "Good. We need to talk." Something in his tone made her stomach clench. "They're coming. Tracks. 2 sets, maybe 3. Found them about a mile north, heading this direction. They're moving slow, the snow's deep, but they'll be here by nightfall. Tomorrow morning at the latest." He moved to the fireplace, stirring the coals back to life. "Time for you to make a choice, Miss Quinn." "What kind of choice?" "Whether you run again or you stand." Alara tightened the blanket around herself. "I can't keep running, not through this. I'd die within a day." "I know, which is why I'm offering you an alternative." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I can hide you. Root cellar beneath the cabin, access through a trapdoor under that rug. It's not comfortable, but it's secure and completely hidden. When Thorne's men arrive, I tell them you were never here. They have no proof otherwise. They'll search the cabin. They can try, but I'm within my rights to refuse them entry without a warrant, and there's no judge within 2 days' ride to issue one. By the time they get legal authority, you could be long gone, assuming I give you supplies and directions to the nearest town." It was a good plan, a rational plan. It gave her a chance at escape. "But you don't think it'll work," she said, reading his hesitation. Rowan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Men like Thorne don't give up. Even if you disappear completely, he'll keep looking. And that contract you mentioned? It's valid for 7 years. 7 years of hiding, moving from place to place, always looking over your shoulder, never settling anywhere long enough to build a life." He met her eyes. "That's not freedom, Miss Quinn. That's a different kind of cage." "So what's the alternative to running?" "You make him let you go." "How? I don't have $20,000. "No, but you have something else, something that can legally nullify his claim." Rowan moved closer, and she could see the calculation in his eyes, the careful weighing of options. "The contract gives him ownership based on your father's debt. But if you're no longer legally your father's dependent, if you're under someone else's protection," understanding crashed into her like a physical blow. "Marriage. A married woman can't be held to contracts signed by her father. Her husband becomes her legal guardian, and any debts transfer to him or are voided entirely depending on the territorial statutes." Rowan's voice was steady, clinical. "If you were my wife when Thorne's men arrive, they'd have no legal claim. The contract would be null." "That's..." Alara's mind raced. "That's insane." "It's practical. We don't even know each other. I know you're brave enough to run into a blizzard rather than accept ownership. I know you've got steel in your spine and fire in your eyes. That's enough for me to know I'd be proud to call you my wife, even if it's only on paper." He held up his hands. "I'm not asking for a real marriage, Miss Quinn. I'm offering you a legal shield. We ride into town, find a preacher or a magistrate, sign the papers. You get protection. I get the satisfaction of watching a bastard like Thorne lose something he thought he owned." "And what do you get?" Ilara asked. "Really, there has to be something in this for you." Rowan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it before. "I told you everyone I loved died. That was true. But what I didn't say was that I failed them. I was supposed to protect them, and I couldn't. I've spent 6 years living with that failure, telling myself I was better off alone, where I couldn't let anyone else down." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw past the hard exterior to the wounded man beneath. "Maybe I can't change what happened to them, but I can damn well make sure it doesn't happen to you. That's what I get, Miss Quinn. A chance to be someone who stands up instead of someone who stands aside. Is that enough of an answer?" Ilara's throat tightened. She understood him better now. This wasn't just about helping her. It was about him helping himself, or at least the part of himself he'd thought was dead. "If we do this," she said slowly, "and Thorne challenges it in court, claims it's fraud or coercion, what happens?" "Then we fight him in court. But we do it as a married couple with legal standing, not as a runaway woman with none." Rowan moved to the window, looking out at the brightening day. "I won't lie to you. It's a risk, but it's a risk with you in the fight, not running from it. Your choice, Miss Quinn, hide and run or stand and fight. But you need to decide now, because those tracks are getting closer. Stand or run, fight or hide." Every instinct she'd developed over 3 days of fleeing screamed at her to choose safety, to disappear into that root cellar and hope for the best. But another part of her, the part that had been born when she climbed out her bedroom window, that had grown stronger with every step through the blizzard, that part refused to keep running. Marcus Thorne thought he owned her. Her father thought he could trade her away. The law thought she was property to be contracted and exchanged. She was done accepting what other people thought. "I'll do it," she said. "I'll marry you." Rowan turned from the window, surprise flickering across his features. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm certain I'm tired of running." She let the blanket fall from her shoulders, standing straighter. "If we're going to do this, we do it right. Legal, witnessed, binding. I won't give Thorne any ammunition to claim it's fraudulent. The nearest town is Coldwater, about 8 miles east. There's a preacher there, Franklin Wells. Known him for years. He'll ask questions, but he'll do it if I vouch for you." Rowan was already moving, pulling supplies from shelves. "We'll need to leave within the hour if we want to make it before dark. The horse can carry us both if we travel light." "What about Thorne's men?" "They're coming from the north. We'll head east through the Valley Pass. If we're lucky, we'll beat them to town entirely. If we're not—" He checked the rifle mounted above the door, then looked at her. "Are you strong enough to ride?" "I'll have to be." "Good." He tossed her a set of clothes, his own, far too large but warm and practical. "Get dressed. We leave in 30 minutes. Ilara caught the bundle, then paused. "Rowan, after we're married, what then? Where do I go?" He stopped his preparations, meeting her eyes across the cabin. "You stay here. With me. That's what married couples do, isn't it?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Don't worry, Miss Quinn. I have a spare room I haven't used in years. You'll have your privacy. This is protection, not anything else. And if I want to leave eventually, when it's safe, then you leave. The marriage gives you legal standing and protection. How you use that protection is up to you." His expression softened. "I'm not trying to cage you, Miss Quinn. I'm trying to give you the keys to your own cage." Something in Ilara's chest loosened at that. She nodded, clutching the clothes. "Thank you. Thank me when we're both still alive and Thorne is nursing his wounded pride from a distance." Rowan returned to his preparations. "Now get dressed. We have a wedding to get to." The ride to Coldwater was brutal. Even with the storm past, the snow was treacherous, deep drifts hiding obstacles, ice sheets concealed beneath innocent-looking surfaces. Rowan's horse, a sturdy mare named Copper, picked her way carefully through the landscape, But progress was slow. Alara sat behind Rowan, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance, acutely aware of every point of contact between them. He'd given her a spare coat, hat, and gloves, and she'd bundled herself as thoroughly as possible. But the cold still found ways to seep in, numbing her face and stealing the feeling from her toes despite the thick socks he'd provided. They didn't talk much during the journey. Conversation was difficult over the wind and the crunch of snow, and both of them seemed lost in their own thoughts about what they were riding toward. By the time Coldwater came into view, a collection of perhaps 40 buildings clustered around a main street, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western peaks. Golden light slanted across the snow, turning the world amber and rose. "It's smaller than I expected," Alara said as they approached the town's edge. "Most people who come to Coldwater don't stay long," Rowan replied. "It's a waypoint for trappers, hunters, the occasional prospector. But Preacher Wells has been here 20 years. If anyone can marry us quickly and legally, it's him." They rode down the main street, attracting stares from the few people brave enough to be out in the cold. Alara felt their eyes tracking her, the strange woman on Rowan Hale's horse, the hermit who never came to town. She could practically hear the gossip starting. Let them talk. After tomorrow, she'd be beyond their gossip, and beyond Marcus Thorne's reach. Rowan stopped in front of a modest church at the end of town. It was a simple structure, white-painted wood with a small steeple, but it looked solid and well-maintained. He dismounted, then helped Alara down, his hand steadying her when her frozen legs nearly gave out. "Can you walk?" "Give me a moment." She stamped her feet, forcing blood back into them. "All right, let's do this." The church door opened before they reached it. A man in his 60s stood in the doorway, tall, lean, with white hair and a face carved by time and mountain weather. His eyes, sharp and assessing, moved between Rowan and Alara. "Rowan Hale," he said, his voice carrying the hint of a Scottish accent. "6 years I've lived a dozen miles from you, and you've darkened my door exactly once. Now you appear with a woman half frozen and a look in your eyes that says trouble's not far behind. Should I be concerned?" "Probably," Rowan admitted. "Can we come in, Franklin? It's complicated." Preacher Wells stepped aside, waving them into the church's interior. It was blessedly warm. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated heat, and Alara made directly for it, holding her frozen hands toward the warmth. "Start talking," Wells said, closing the door. Rowan did, quietly, efficiently, laying out the situation without embellishment. Thorne, the contract, Alara's flight, the men pursuing her. Wells listened without interruption, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. "And you want to marry her," Wells said when Rowan finished. "Not out of love, but as legal protection." "Is there a law against marrying for practical reasons?" Rowan asked. "No, but there are laws against fraudulent marriages, unions entered into solely to circumvent legal obligations." Wells turned his attention to Alara. "Young woman, I need you to speak plainly. Is Rowan coercing you into this?" "No," Alara said firmly. "He's offering me a choice, the first real choice I've had since my father signed away my freedom." "And you understand what marriage means? The commitments involved?" "I understand it's a legal contract that will protect me from being owned by a man who thinks he can buy human beings." Alara met his eyes steadily. "If that's not a good enough reason for marriage, Preacher Wells, then I don't know what is." Wells studied her for a long moment, then turned back to Rowan. "If Thorne challenges this, it'll end up in front of Judge Morrison. He's fair, but he's also a stickler for the letter of the law. You'll need to prove the marriage is genuine, that you intend to honor the commitment, not just use it as a legal dodge." "We'll cross that bridge when we come to it," Rowan said. "Right now we need the marriage registered and legal before Thorne's men arrive. Can you do it?" "I can, but I'll need witnesses, 2 of them. And I'll need you both to swear before me and before heaven that you're entering into this of your own free will, understanding the sanctity of the bond." Wells crossed his arms. "I won't participate in a mockery of marriage, even for a good cause." "It's not a mockery," Alara said quietly. "It might not be traditional, but it's real. We're both choosing this, both committing to protecting each other. Isn't that what marriage is supposed to be?" Wells's expression softened slightly. "A better definition than most couples manage." He moved to a desk in the corner, pulling out a large book and a pen. "I'll get the paperwork started. Rowan, go next door to the general store. Martha Henderson and her husband can serve as witnesses. Tell them I need them immediately." Rowan nodded and headed back out into the cold. Elara remained by the stove, watching Wells prepare the documents with practiced efficiency. "You're braver than you look," Wells said without looking up. "I'm terrified," Elara admitted. "That's not incompatible with bravery. Often, it's a requirement." He glanced up at her. "Rowan's a good man. Damaged, but good. What he told you about his family, it's true. He lost his wife and daughter to fever 7 years ago. Blamed himself for not getting them to a doctor in time, even though half the territory was snowed in and no one could have reached them. The town blamed him too, because grief demands a target." Alara's heart clenched. "That's why he lives alone. He punishes himself with isolation because he thinks he deserves it. Maybe you'll be good for each other, two people escaping cages, even if the cages are different." Wells dipped his pen in ink. "Or maybe you'll destroy each other. That's the gamble of marriage, isn't it?" Before Elara could respond, the door opened again. Rowan entered with a middle-aged couple, the woman bundled in shawls, the man wearing a heavy coat dusted with snow. "Witnesses present," Rowan announced. "Can we proceed?" Wells nodded, gesturing everyone forward. "Martha, Bill, you're here to witness the marriage of Rowan Hale and—" He looked at Elara. "Full name?" "Elara Margaret Quinn." "Elara Margaret Quinn. Standard territorial marriage contract to be recorded with the county clerk as soon as weather permits." He positioned the couple on either side of where Rowan and Elara would stand. "Everyone ready?" Elara looked at Rowan. He met her gaze, steady and sure. She gave a small nod. "Ready," they said in unison. Wells opened his book to the marriage ceremony, but before he could begin, the church door burst open. 3 men stood in the doorway, snow falling from their coats, rifles in their hands. "That's far enough," the lead man said. He was tall, heavy-set, with a sheriff's badge pinned to his coat. "Elara Quinn, you're under arrest for breach of contract and theft of property." Everything stopped. Then Rowan stepped forward, placing himself between Elara and the armed men. "Sheriff Cameron, I wasn't aware running from unlawful bondage was a crime in Montana territory." "Not unlawful when there's a legal contract." Cameron produced a folded document from his coat. "Signed, witnessed, and certified. Miss Quinn is obligated to Marcus Thorne for 7 years of service. She ran. That's theft of contracted labor, a territorial offense." "Show me the statute," Rowan demanded. "Don't need to. I've got the territorial judge's authorization to retrieve her by any means necessary." Cameron's eyes were hard. "Step aside, Hale. This doesn't concern you." Actually, Sheriff," Preacher Wells spoke up, his voice carrying authority that made everyone look at him. "It does concern him, because as of 2 minutes ago, Miss Quinn became Mrs. Hale." Silence crashed down like an avalanche. Cameron's face darkened. "What?" "You heard me. They're married. I was in the process of recording the ceremony when you so rudely interrupted." Wells held up the half-completed document. "Which means Miss Quinn, Mrs. Hale, is under her husband's legal protection, not her father's. Any contracts signed by Thomas Quinn regarding his daughter are now void." "That's impossible. You can't have—" "But I did, with 2 witnesses present." Wells gestured to the Hendersons, who nodded mutely. "The marriage is legal and binding. If Marcus Thorne has an issue with that, he can take it up with Judge Morrison at the next circuit court." Cameron's hand tightened on his rifle. "This is fraud." "Fraud would be marrying her under false pretenses or coercion," Wells said calmly. "Both parties entered into this union of their own free will, before witnesses and with full understanding of the commitment. That's the definition of a legal marriage. Thorne won't accept this." "Then Thorne can challenge it in court," Rowan said. His voice was level, but Elara could see the tension in his shoulders. "But until a judge says otherwise, my wife stays with me. You have no authority to take her." The 2 men behind Cameron shifted nervously, looking to their leader for direction. The standoff stretched, tension winding tighter with each passing second. Finally, Cameron lowered his rifle, slightly. "This isn't over, Hale. Thorne won't let this go. He'll have every lawyer between here and Helena going through that marriage, looking for any crack to break it open. Let him try." Rowan's hand rested on Elara's arm, protective and possessive in equal measure. "My wife and I will be at my cabin if anyone needs us. They're welcome to visit, without weapons and with proper manners. Cameron's jaw worked, but he stepped back toward the door. You're making a mistake, both of you. Thorn has connections, resources. He'll destroy you. He can try that too, Alara said, finding her voice. But he'll do it facing me as a free woman with legal standing, not as property he thinks he owns. Tell him that for me, Sheriff. Tell him I'm not his. I never was his, and I never will be. Cameron's expression said everything about what he thought of women who spoke out of turn. But he didn't argue. With a final glare, he and his men backed out of the church, letting the door slam behind them. The moment they were gone, Alara's legs gave out. Rowan caught her, lowering her gently into a nearby pew. Easy, he murmured. You're all right. They're gone. For now, Wells said grimly. But Cameron was right about one thing. Thorn will challenge this. You need to be prepared for a legal battle. Then we'll fight it. Rowan looked down at Alara. Together, right? She looked up at him. The stranger who'd saved her life, offered her protection, and just defied armed men for her freedom. And she realized that somewhere in the past 3 days, he'd stopped being a stranger. Together, she agreed. Wells moved to his desk, making quick notes in his record book. I'll finish this documentation and get it filed with the county by week's end. In the meantime, I suggest you both go home, prepare for what's coming, and maybe, he looked at them both pointedly, try to act like a married couple. Because if this ends up in front of Judge Morrison, he'll want proof that your marriage is genuine. How do we prove that? Alara asked. By living like you mean it. Wells closed his book with a decisive thump. Now get out of my church before someone else shows up with guns. And Rowan, try not to be a stranger for another 6 years. The ride back to the cabin was tense. Darkness had fallen completely, the temperature dropping with it. Copper picked her way carefully through the snow, following the trail they'd broken on the way to town. Behind them, Coldwater's lights faded into the distance. Alara's mind was racing. Married. She was married to a man she'd known for 3 days. A man who'd just defied local law enforcement for her. You're thinking too loudly, Rowan said. I'm married to you, and I don't even know if you prefer coffee or tea. Coffee? Strong, black, hot enough to strip paint. He paused. You? Tea with honey. Or I used to when I had access to honey. She rested her forehead against his back, suddenly exhausted. This is insane, isn't it? We just got married to people we barely know. I know you're brave, stubborn, and you've got a good right hook. You punched me in your sleep last night. Despite everything, Alara laughed. I did not. You absolutely did. Caught me right in the shoulder. I figured you were fighting off nightmares. His voice softened. And for what it's worth, Miss Quinn, Mrs. Hale, I know that you'd rather face the unknown with me than the certain hell that Thorn was offering. That tells me everything I need to know about your character. What about your character? What do I know about you? That I'm stubborn enough to live alone in the mountains for 6 years, I'm a decent shot with a rifle, and I'm apparently willing to marry a woman I just met to keep her free. He paused. And that I failed the people I loved before, and I won't fail you, even if this marriage is just on paper. What if it doesn't stay on paper? The question was out before Alara could stop it. Rowan tensed slightly. What do you mean? I mean, if we're going to convince a judge this is real, we'll have to act like it's real. And if we act like it's real for long enough. She trailed off, uncertain how to finish the thought. Then we'll deal with that if and when it happens, Rowan said carefully. For now, let's focus on surviving whatever Thorn throws at us. Everything else can wait. It was a reasonable answer, a careful answer, but Alara caught something in his tone, a hint of possibility, quickly suppressed. They rode the rest of the way in silence. The cabin was exactly as they'd left it, isolated, secure, surrounded by pristine snow that showed no signs of unwelcome visitors. Rowan helped Alara dismount, then led Copper to the small stable, murmuring soothingly to the horse as he removed her tack and provided feed. Alara watched from the doorway, surprised by the gentleness in his movements, the obvious care he took with the animal. She's been with me since I first came to the mountains, Rowan said, noticing her attention. Saved my life more than once. I owe her everything. You collect debts like that, don't you? People or animals you owe. I suppose I do. He closed the stable and joined her at the cabin door. Better than collecting enemies. Inside, Alara moved automatically to build up the fire while Rowan secured the door, not just the latch, but a heavy wooden bar that could withstand significant force. She noticed there were other preparations too, shutters on the windows that could be locked from inside, ammunition within easy reach of the rifle, a large knife mounted within grabbing distance of the bed. He'd been ready for violence for a long time. She wondered if he'd been expecting it or hoping for it, a clear enemy to fight instead of the vague demons of guilt and loss. "What happens now?" she asked as he finished his preparations. "Now we wait." Well, Rowan hung his coat and moved to the small cooking area, pulling out supplies. Thorne will make his move within the next few days, either through legal channels or through force. We need to be ready for both. Can we win against a man with that much power? Honestly, I don't know. He started preparing a simple meal, salted pork, potatoes, the last of the bread. But I know we've got right on our side, and that counts for something. Not everything, but something. Alara moved to help with the food, falling into an easy rhythm beside him. It felt strangely domestic, this quiet cooperation. "Rowan, what Wells said about your family. I'm sorry, I didn't know." His hand stilled over the potatoes. "Nothing to be sorry about. It was 7 years ago. The pain doesn't follow timelines." "No, it doesn't." He resumed his work, but his voice was rougher. "My daughter's name was Emma. She was 5. Loved to sing, even though she couldn't carry a tune to save her life. My wife was Sarah. She was everything good I'll never deserve again." "What happened?" "Fever. Started with Emma, spread to Sarah. I tried everything. Herbs, cold compresses, prayers I hadn't spoken since childhood. Nothing worked. By the time I could have gotten them to a doctor, they were already gone." He set down the knife, staring at the wall. "The town said I'd been negligent, said a real man would have gotten them help sooner. And they were right." "No." Alara put her hand on his arm. "They were wrong. Fever kills, Rowan. It's not your fault. Tell that to the part of me that sees their faces every night before I sleep." They finished preparing the meal in silence. But when they sat down to eat, Alara across from Rowan at the small table, something had shifted between them. They weren't just allies anymore, or a couple bound by legal convenience. They were two broken people who'd found each other in a storm, and were learning, slowly, carefully, to trust again. "So," Alara said, trying to lighten the mood, "how does a married couple spend their first evening together when they're waiting for armed men to possibly show up?" Rowan almost smiled. "I imagine most couples don't have that particular problem." "Then we're not most couples." "No," he agreed, and this time the smile reached his eyes. "No, I suppose we're not." They ate and talked, really talked, for the first time, trading stories from their pasts, learning the small details that built a life. Alara told him about growing up in Chicago before her family moved west, about her mother who died when she was 12, about dreams of becoming a teacher that had died with her father's gambling debts. Rowan told her about building the cabin with his own hands, about learning to survive in the mountains through trial and error and help from an old trapper named Jack who died 3 winters back, about the strange peace he'd found in solitude, and the equally strange feeling of having someone to talk to again. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters. But inside, warmed by fire and food and unexpected companionship, both of them felt, for the first time in too long, something like hope. And when they finally turned in for the night, Rowan to his bed, Alara to the small room he'd cleared for her, neither of them mentioned how strange it was to say goodnight to a spouse they'd married hours ago. Some things were better left unspoken, at least for now. The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn. Alara woke to the sound of Copper's frantic neighing from the stable. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness of her small room, heart already hammering. She'd learned to sleep lightly these past days, every creak and groan of the cabin pulling her toward wakefulness. The horse's distress meant something was wrong. She threw off the blankets and grabbed the heavy wool shirt Rowan had given her, pulling it over her nightdress as she rushed into the main room. Rowan was already up, standing at the window with his rifle, peering through a gap in the shutters. "How many?" she whispered. 6, maybe 7. They're trying to surround the cabin. His voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. They're not being subtle about it either. This isn't a legal visit. Alara moved to the other window, careful to stay back from the glass. In the gray pre-dawn light, she could make out shapes moving through the trees. Men on foot, spreading out in a wide circle around the property. They wore heavy coats and carried rifles. "Thorne's men," she said. It wasn't a question. "Looks like he decided not to wait for the courts." Rowan moved away from the window, checking his ammunition. "Get dressed, properly dressed, with boots and your coat. If we need to run, I want you ready. I'm not leaving you here alone." "Alara, we're married, remember? For better or worse, even if we made those vows under unusual circumstances." She met his eyes steadily. "I'm not running anymore. Not from them and not from this." Something flickered in his expression, surprise maybe, or pride. "Then stay low and stay away from the windows. These men aren't here to talk." He was right. A moment later, a voice rang out across the clearing, amplified by the morning stillness. "Rowan Hale, send out the woman, and we'll leave you in peace." Rowan moved back to the window. "That's not happening, Jenkins. She's my wife, and she stays with me. Your marriage is a fraud, and everyone knows it." The voice, Jenkins, apparently, sounded closer now. "Thorne's got lawyers already working on annulment papers. You're just delaying the inevitable." "Then let the lawyers handle it," Rowan shouted back. "This doesn't require guns." "Thorne says different. He says you stole his property, and he wants it back." Alara felt ice slide down her spine at the casual way Jenkins said property, like she was a horse or a piece of furniture. Rowan must have felt her reaction because he glanced back at her, his expression hardening. "I stole nothing," he called out. "And Alara Hale, is a human being, not property. Now get off my land before someone gets hurt." "Last chance, Hale. Send her out or we're coming in." Rowan's answer was to chamber a round in his rifle, the metallic click loud in the cabin's silence. "Try it." For a long moment, nothing happened. The standoff stretched, tension building like a storm about to break. Alara could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the rough wood of the floor beneath her boots, could smell the lingering wood smoke from last night's fire. Then a shot rang out. The bullet punched through a shutter, sending splinters flying. Rowan dropped below the window, returning fire through the gap. The crack of his rifle was deafening in the enclosed space. "Get to the root cellar," he shouted at Alara. "Now!" "No!" She grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace, the only weapon within reach. "I told you, I'm not running." Another shot, this one from a different angle. They were definitely surrounding the cabin, trying to find weak points in Rowan's defenses. He moved from window to window, keeping low, only rising to fire when he had a clear target. "I'm not asking you to run," he said between shots. "I'm asking you to take cover. You can't help me if you're dead." He had a point, much as she hated to admit it. Alara crouched behind the heavy oak table, gripping the poker, watching as Rowan defended their home with a precision that spoke of experience she hadn't known he possessed. "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" she called out. "War. Long time ago." He fired again, and someone outside cursed loudly. "Turns out, some things you never forget." The gunfire intensified. Bullets thudded into the cabin's walls, into the shutters, one shattering through a window to embed itself in the far wall. Rowan returned fire methodically, not wasting ammunition, making each shot count. But they were outnumbered, and both of them knew it. This could only end one way unless something changed. That something came in the form of a new voice, cutting across the chaos. "Hold your fire! All of you! Hold your damn fire!" The shooting stopped abruptly. Alara risked a glance toward the window and saw a rider approaching the cabin, a single man on horseback, riding hard through the snow. Even from a distance, she could see the glint of a badge on his coat. Not Sheriff Cameron this time. Someone else. The rider pulled up short of the cabin, positioning himself between Rowan's position and the hidden gunman. He was older than Cameron, perhaps 50, with gray threading through his dark hair and a face that had seen too many winters. His badge was different too, larger, with more authority behind it. "This is U.S. Marshal Thomas Garrett," the man shouted, his voice carrying across the clearing. "I'm ordering all parties to stand down immediately." "Marshal, this doesn't concern federal law," Jenkins called back from his position. This is a territorial matter. A territorial matter that involves armed assault on a legal marriage, Jenkins, which makes it very much my concern. Garrett turned his horse in a slow circle, making sure everyone could see him. I want everyone with a weapon to show themselves right now. That includes you, Hale. Rowan looked at Alara, a question in his eyes. She gave a small nod. They didn't have many options at this point. I'm coming out, Rowan called. But I'm keeping my rifle. That's acceptable. Just keep it pointed down. Rowan moved to the door, unbarring it carefully. Stay here, he told Alara quietly. If this goes wrong, it won't, she said, with more confidence than she felt. Go. He stepped outside into the growing daylight, rifle held loosely at his side. Alara moved to the window, watching as the scene unfolded. One by one, Thorne's men emerged from their positions. 6 of them, as Rowan had guessed, all armed and looking uncertain now that federal authority had arrived. They gathered in an uneasy cluster, weapons lowered but not surrendered. Marshal Garrett dismounted, his horse's breath steaming in the cold air. Now, someone wanted to tell me why I had to ride 3 hours before sunrise because a territorial judge's clerk came hammering on my door saying Marcus Thorne was about to start a shooting war. We have legal authority to retrieve stolen property, Jenkins protested. Thorne has a contract. Had a contract, Garrett interrupted. Past tense, because that contract was negated when Miss Quinn married Mr. Hale here, which I verified personally before I rode out. He pulled a document from his coat. This is a certified copy of their marriage record, signed by Preacher Franklin Wells and witnessed by 2 upstanding citizens of Coldwater. You know what this means? It means they committed fraud, Jenkins insisted. It means they got married, which is last I checked still legal in this territory. Garrett's voice carried an edge of steel now. And unless you've got evidence that proves coercion or fraud, actual evidence, not just wounded pride, then this marriage stands. Thorne won't accept this. Then Thorne can file a complaint with the circuit court like everyone else who doesn't get their way. The marshal moved closer to Jenkins, his presence alone making the other man step back. What he can't do is send armed men to assault a legal marriage. What you all can't do is lay siege to a man's property because your employer thinks he owns a human being. The contract was legal. Jenkins was starting to sound desperate now. $20,000 in debt, settled through labor. That's allowed under territorial statute. Debt bondage for labor is one thing, Jenkins, but you and I both know what Thorne really wanted from Miss Quinn, and it wasn't housekeeping. Garrett's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. So here's what's going to happen. You and these men are going to ride back to Thorne's estate. You're going to tell him that his contract is void, his claim is dismissed, and if he has a problem with that, he can take it up with Judge Morrison at the next circuit court session. Are we clear? Jenkins looked like he wanted to argue, but the presence of a U.S. Marshal and the very real possibility of federal charges if he pushed further made him reconsider. We'll tell him, but this isn't over. It is for today, Garrett said firmly. Now get out of here before I decide to charge you all with assault and unlawful imprisonment. The men withdrew slowly, mounting their horses and disappearing back into the forest. The clearing fell silent except for the sound of wind through the pines and the distant call of a crow. Garrett turned to Rowan. You must be one hell of a cook, Hale, because I can't think of another reason you'd come out of 6 years of solitude to marry a woman you just met. She needed help, Rowan said simply. I was in a position to provide it. Noble, stupid, but noble. The marshal's eyes moved past Rowan to the cabin door, where Alara had emerged, still gripping the iron poker. Mrs. Hale, I presume? Yes, sir. Alara set down the poker and moved to stand beside Rowan. Thank you for intervening. I think they would have done exactly what they were prepared to do, which is why I'm here. Garrett studied her with sharp, assessing eyes. Judge Morrison sent word to me last night, said Marcus Thorne was claiming fraud and demanding your immediate return, said there were irregularities in your marriage that warranted investigation. Alara's stomach dropped. Irregularities? He's claiming the marriage was entered into solely to circumvent his legal contract. That it's not a genuine union, just a legal dodge. Garrett pulled out another document. He's filed for annulment and demanding that you be remanded to his custody pending the court's decision. That's insane, Alara protested. I'm a married woman. He has no legal claim. He's arguing that your marriage isn't valid because it lacks the fundamental component of a genuine marital union, specifically that you and Mr. Hale don't actually intend to live as husband and wife. The marshal looked between them. Is he right? The question hung in the cold morning air. Alara felt Rowan tense beside her. We're living under the same roof, Rowan said carefully. We're committed to protecting each other. That's more genuine than half the marriages in this territory. Maybe so. But Judge Morrison is going to want more than philosophy when this case comes to trial. Garrett folded the documents and returned them to his coat. You've got about 2 weeks before the circuit court convenes in Helena. Morrison will hear Thorne's petition for annulment, and you'll need to convince him that your marriage is real, that it's not just a legal arrangement, but an actual partnership. How do we do that? Alara asked. By acting like a married couple. By demonstrating that you've built a life together, not just signed some papers. Garrett's expression softened slightly. Look, I don't know your situation beyond what's in these reports, but I do know that Thorne is a vindictive bastard who doesn't like losing, and he's got the money to make this fight last as long as he wants. If you're going to beat him, you need to be smarter and more prepared than he expects. He moved toward his horse, then paused. One more thing. Thorne's not just angry about losing his contract, he's humiliated. A man like that, in his position, being defied by a woman he thought he owned and a hermit who's supposed to be broken? That's personal now. He won't just challenge your marriage in court. He'll try to destroy both of you any way he can. Let him try, Rowan said quietly. Garrett swung into his saddle. That's the spirit I like to hear, but be smart about it. Get to Helena early. Find yourselves a good lawyer. And for the love of all that's holy, make sure you can prove your marriage is genuine, because Thorne will bring every resource he has to prove it's not. He touched his hat in farewell and rode off, leaving Rowan and Alara standing in the snow-covered clearing, the sun finally breaking over the mountain peaks. Well, Alara said after a long moment, that could have gone worse. Rowan let out a breath that might have been a laugh. That's one way of looking at it. They stood there in silence, both processing what had just happened, the attack, the intervention, the looming court battle. Finally, Rowan turned toward the cabin. Come on, let's get inside before we freeze to death. We've got planning to do. Inside, Alara built up the fire while Rowan checked the cabin for damage. 3 bullets had made it through, one embedded in the wall, one in the floor, one that had shattered a ceramic cup. It could have been so much worse. We're going to need a lawyer, Alara said, warming her hands by the flames. A good one. Do you know anyone? I know exactly one lawyer, and she's in Helena. Rowan moved to his small desk, pulling out paper and a pen. Catherine Brennan. She helped me settle some land disputes when I first claimed this property. Sharp as a knife and twice as dangerous in a courtroom. Will she take the case? If I ask her, yes. Catherine owes me. I testified for her brother when he was falsely accused of theft. Saved him from prison. He began writing quickly, his handwriting surprisingly neat. I'll send this with the next mail rider. She'll need time to prepare. Alara watched him work, struck again by the complexity of this man who'd saved her. A war veteran who could shoot with deadly accuracy. A hermit who knew lawyers in Helena. A widower who'd buried his family and his old life, but still remembered how to fight for someone else. Rowan? She said quietly. What the marshal said about proving our marriage is genuine. What did he mean? Rowan set down his pen. He meant that Thorne will try to prove we're strangers living under one roof out of convenience, not commitment. That our marriage is just paperwork, not partnership. And how do we prove otherwise? He turned to face her fully. By being partners. By knowing each other well enough that when someone asks about our life together, we have answers that match. By demonstrating that we've built something here that goes beyond a legal shield. You mean we need to actually act married? I mean we need to actually be married, at least in the ways that matter for the court. Rowan ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she was beginning to recognize. Look, I'm not suggesting anything inappropriate. Your room stays your room and your privacy stays intact, but we need to know each other. Really know each other. The little things, how you take your tea, what you do first thing in the morning, what makes you laugh, what makes you angry, the details that couples accumulate over time. We have 2 weeks. Then we'd better start now. It was a practical suggestion, born of necessity. But as Alara looked at Rowan across the cabin, this man who'd become her husband, her protector, her unlikely partner, she realized the idea didn't frighten her the way it should have. "All right," she said. "Where do we start?" They started with breakfast. It seemed mundane, almost ridiculous given everything that had just happened. But Rowan insisted, pointing out that meals were where couples spent the most time together, where habits and preferences became visible. "I cook," he announced, pulling out supplies. "Badly, but consistently." "Then I'll supervise," Ilara said, settling at the table. "And critique." "That's very married of you." "I thought so." She watched as he worked, noting the efficiency of his movements, the care he took even with simple tasks. He was a man who'd learned to be self-sufficient, but there was no joy in it, just competence born of necessity. "Did your wife cook?" The question was out before she could reconsider it. Rowan paused, then continued his work. "Sarah was an excellent cook. Could make a feast out of nothing. I never appreciated it properly until I had to feed myself." "What was she like?" "Kind, patient, had a laugh that could fill a room." His voice was soft with memory. "She saw good in people even when they didn't deserve it. Saw good in me, which might have been her biggest blind spot." "I doubt that." "You didn't know me before." He cracked eggs into a pan. "I was arrogant, thought I knew better than everyone, thought I could control everything if I just worked hard enough, planned well enough. Sarah tried to tell me that some things can't be controlled. I didn't listen. And then she got sick. And then she got sick, and all my certainty couldn't save her." He flipped the eggs with more force than necessary. "I've had 6 years to think about what I should have done differently. The list is long." Alara rose and moved to stand beside him. "May I?" He looked surprised, but stepped aside, letting her take over the cooking. She adjusted the heat, added a pinch of salt, worked with the same efficiency he'd displayed, but with something extra. Attention that spoke of care, rather than just survival. "My mother taught me," she explained, "before she died. She said cooking was how you showed love when words weren't enough." Smart woman. She was. And she'd tell you the same thing I'm going to tell you. You can't change the past, Rowan. You can only choose what you do with the present. He was quiet for a long moment, watching her work. "And what are we doing with the present, Alara?" "Surviving, building, learning to be something neither of us expected to be." She divided the eggs onto 2 plates, added the bread he'd toasted. "Being partners, like you said, even if that partnership started in the strangest way possible." They ate together at the small table, and for the first time since their hasty marriage, it felt almost natural, not comfortable. There was still too much unknown between them for comfort, but natural. Like this was something they could grow into, given time. After breakfast, they spent the day preparing for the trial. Rowan wrote his letter to Catherine Brennan, explaining the situation in stark detail. Alara went through her story again and again, making sure she could recite every moment from the night her father told her about the contract to the morning she collapsed at Rowan's door. Every detail would matter in court, but they also took breaks to just talk, to learn each other the way the marshal had suggested. Favorite seasons, childhood memories, things they missed from their old lives, things they appreciated about their new one, small details that painted a fuller picture of who they each were. "I miss music," Alara admitted as evening approached. "My mother played piano. She'd play every night before bed, and I'd fall asleep to it. I haven't heard music in years." "I had a harmonica once," Rowan said. "Lost it somewhere in the move out here. I was never very good, but I could play a few tunes." "What kind?" "Old folk songs, mostly. Sarah used to request them." He smiled at the memory. "She'd dance around the cabin with Emma, both of them completely off rhythm, but they didn't care." "That sounds beautiful." It was. The smile faded. "I haven't thought about those evenings in a long time. Easier not to." "Maybe," Alara said gently, "it's time to think about them. Not to torture yourself, but to remember that you had something worth remembering. That you were happy once and could be happy again." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something shift in his expression. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I ran into a blizzard rather than accept being someone's property. Desperation makes philosophers of us all." That night, they lingered longer by the fire before retiring. There was a tentative comfort building between them, something that might one day become actual friendship, or perhaps something more, though neither of them was ready to name it yet. "Rowan?" Alara said as she finally rose to head to her room. "Thank you for all of this, for fighting for me when you didn't have to." "I did have to," he said. "Maybe not legally, but morally. You deserved someone to stand with you." "Well, I'm glad it was you." She meant it, and from the look in his eyes, he knew she did. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange blur of preparation and domesticity. They rode into Coldwater twice to gather supplies and file additional paperwork supporting their marriage. Each time they faced stares and whispers, the hermit and his sudden bride, the subject of intense speculation and gossip. Alara learned to ignore it, keeping her head high and her hand in Rowan's whenever they walked through town. If people wanted to talk, let them talk. She had nothing to be ashamed of. Preacher Wells visited once, bringing news that Thorne had indeed filed formal annulment papers and was sparing no expense in building his case. The preacher also brought something else, a small package addressed to Alara. "It was left at the church," Wells explained. "No name on it, but I recognized the handwriting." Inside was a letter from her father. Alara's hands shook as she unfolded it. "Alara, I know you won't forgive me. I don't expect you to. What I did was unforgivable. Trading you like property to save my own skin. I was desperate, I was scared, and I was a coward. Thorne has cut off all contact with me. Says I've brought him nothing but trouble, and he wants nothing more to do with the Quinn family. I've lost everything, the business, the house, whatever standing I had. All that's left is this letter and my regrets. I won't ask for your forgiveness because I don't deserve it. But I want you to know something. When I signed that contract, I told myself it was just 7 years, that you'd survive it, that you were strong enough. I didn't let myself think about what those 7 years would actually mean. Now I can't think of anything else. I heard you married Rowan Hale. I'm told he's a good man, despite his reputation as a hermit. I hope he treats you better than I ever did. I hope you find happiness. I couldn't give you. I'm leaving the territory. There's nothing left for me here. By the time you read this, I'll already be gone. Maybe that's better for both of us. Your father, Thomas Quinn." Alara read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and placed it in the fire. She watched the paper catch and burn, the words turning to ash. "What did it say?" Rowan asked quietly. "Exactly what you'd expect. Excuses, regrets, goodbye." She watched the last of the paper disappear into flame. "He's leaving the territory. We won't see him again." "And how do you feel about that?" "Relieved." She turned away from the fire. "Is that wrong? To feel relieved that your own father is leaving forever? After what he did?" "No. It's honest." Rowan came to stand beside her. "Blood doesn't automatically make someone family, Alara. Family is the people who stand by you, who choose you, who fight for you. Your father failed that test. You owe him nothing." "And what does that make you?" she asked softly. "We're married, but we barely know each other. Are we family?" "We're becoming something," he said after a moment. "I don't know what to call it yet, but it's more than a legal arrangement. At least it is for me." "For me too," she admitted. The confession hung between them, significant and frightening in equal measure. But before either could say more, the sound of approaching horses shattered the moment. They both tensed, Rowan's hand moving automatically toward his rifle. But the visitor who emerged from the tree line wasn't one of Thorne's men. It was a woman, middle-aged, well-dressed, riding with the confidence of someone used to being in control. "That's Catherine Brennan," Rowan said, surprise evident in his voice. "I didn't expect her to come here." They went outside to meet her. Catherine dismounted smoothly, her sharp eyes taking in everything, the cabin, the surrounding land, Rowan and Alara standing together. "Rowan Hale," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "You ask me to take a case? I come to evaluate my clients, particularly when those clients are fighting Marcus Thorne." "Catherine, I appreciate you coming." Rowan shook her hand, then turned to Alara. "This is my wife, Alara. Alara, Catherine Brennan, the best lawyer in Montana Territory." "Second best," Catherine corrected, "but I'm working on it." She studied Alara with the same intensity she'd applied to the property. You're the woman who ran into a blizzard rather than become Thorne's property? Yes, ma'am. Good. That shows backbone. We'll need it. Catherine handed her reins to Rowan. Get me inside where it's warm and let's talk about how we're going to destroy Marcus Thorne's case. Inside, over hot coffee, Catherine laid out the situation with brutal clarity. Thorne's argument is simple. Your marriage is fraudulent because it was entered into solely to circumvent his legal contract. He's claiming that you, Alara, had no intention of being a real wife, and you, Rowan, had no intention of being a real husband. You just signed papers to break his claim. But we are married, Alara protested. Legally married with witnesses. Legally married, yes. But Thorne's lawyers will argue that legal marriage requires more than just papers. It requires intent to build a life together, to fulfill the duties and obligations of matrimony. They'll paint you as strangers using marriage as a shield, not as partners building a home. Then we prove we're partners, Rowan said. How? Catherine leaned forward. You've been married less than 3 weeks. You can't show years of shared history. What can you show? Alara and Rowan exchanged glances. What could they show? We know each other, Alara said slowly. We've learned about each other, our pasts, our preferences, our daily habits. We share meals, share space, share responsibilities. Good start, but not enough. Thorne will argue that's just cohabitation, not marriage. Catherine pulled out a notebook. Here's what we need. Evidence of emotional intimacy, of long-term planning together, of commitment that goes beyond the immediate crisis. Letters between you would help, but you haven't been apart long enough to write any. Witnesses who've seen you together as a couple would be ideal. Preacher Wells, Rowan offered. He married us, and he's visited since. He can testify to our interactions. He can, and he will. But he's also clearly sympathetic to your cause, which Thorne's lawyers will use to undermine his credibility. Catherine tapped her pen against her notebook. What about your living arrangements? Do you share a bedroom? Silence fell over the cabin. No, Rowan said finally. Alara has her own room. That's a problem. Separate bedrooms suggest a marriage in name only. Catherine looked between them. I'm not suggesting anything improper, but you need to understand how this will look to a judge. Married couples share a bedroom. That's the expectation. We can't fake that, Alara said quietly. If we lie about it, Thorne's lawyers will find out. Then don't lie. Make it true. Catherine held up her hand before either could protest. I'm not suggesting you consummate the marriage if that's not what you want. But sharing a room, sharing a bed, even if it's just for sleeping, that's what married couples do. And it's what you'll need to be able to testify to honestly if this case goes badly. The weight of what she was suggesting settled over them. Rowan stood, pacing to the window. That's asking a lot, he said, his back to them. I know. But Thorne is asking for everything, your freedom, Alara, and your reputation, Rowan. If you want to win this, you need to be willing to defend your marriage in every way that matters. Catherine's voice softened. Look, I've been doing this for 15 years. I've seen real marriages that look less committed than what I've observed between you two in the last hour. You care about each other. That's obvious. Maybe it's time to stop pretending this is just a legal arrangement and start treating it like the genuine partnership it's becoming. Alara felt her face heat, but she couldn't deny the truth in Catherine's words. The past weeks hadn't felt like play acting. They'd felt real. Give us a moment? Rowan asked without turning. Catherine nodded, rising. I'll check on my horse. Take your time. She left, closing the door behind her. The silence stretched between Rowan and Alara, heavy with implications. She's right, Alara said finally, about all of it. If we're going to convince a judge this is real, we need to live like it's real. Sharing a room is different than sharing meals and conversation. I know, but I trust you, Rowan. You've had every opportunity to take advantage of this situation, and you haven't. You've been nothing but respectful and honorable. She moved to stand beside him at the window. If sharing a room is what it takes to protect our marriage, then that's what we'll do. He finally turned to look at her. You're sure? I'm sure. Are you? He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. We'll move your things into the main room tonight. The bed's large enough, and I'll rig a curtain to give you privacy when you need it. We'll make it work. Thank you. Don't thank me. We're in this together, remember? He managed a small smile. Besides, if we're going to convince a judge we're genuinely married, we might as well convince ourselves first. They brought Catherine back inside and told her their decision. She nodded approvingly, making notes in her book. Good. Now, let's talk strategy. The trial is in 9 days. We'll present your case as a genuine love story. Two people who found each other in crisis and chose to build a life together. Romantic, compelling, and most importantly, true enough that neither of you will trip over your own testimony. What about Thorne? Alara asked. What will he present? He'll paint you as a desperate runaway who used Rowan, and Rowan as a naive hermit who was manipulated. He'll bring witnesses who'll testify to your separate bedrooms, your short acquaintance, the convenient timing of your marriage. He'll argue that no reasonable person would believe your marriage is genuine. So how do we fight that? Catherine smiled, sharp and predatory. By being so genuinely committed to each other that the jury has no choice but to believe you. By showing that what you have is real, even if it started unconventionally. By making Marcus Thorne look like the villain he is, a man who thinks he can own human beings and is throwing a tantrum because someone said no. She spent the next several hours coaching them. How to testify, how to present themselves, how to answer difficult questions without appearing defensive or rehearsed. She was thorough, demanding, and occasionally brutal in her assessments. But she was also clearly skilled, and by the time she prepared to leave, Alara felt something like hope beginning to build. One last thing, Catherine said as she mounted her horse. When you're in that courtroom, don't perform for the judge. Be yourselves. The partnership I've seen today, that's what will save you. Trust it. She rode off into the gathering darkness, leaving Rowan and Alara to face the reality of what they'd agreed to. That night, they rearranged the cabin. Alara's few possessions moved into the main room. Rowan hung a canvas curtain that could be pulled across the room for privacy when needed. They worked in companionable silence, both aware that they were crossing another threshold in their unusual marriage. When the work was done, they stood on opposite sides of the bed, a physical barrier that suddenly felt symbolic. I'll take the left side, Rowan offered, unless you prefer it. Right side is fine, Alara managed to smile. This is strange, isn't it? Incredibly strange. But then again, nothing about our marriage has been conventional. He moved to the fire, banking it for the night. We'll figure this out, Alara, just like we figured out everything else. Together, she said. Together, he agreed. They prepared for sleep with careful consideration for each other's privacy, using the curtain, turning their backs, giving space where space was needed. And when they finally lay down, Rowan on his side, Alara on hers, a careful distance between them, the situation was awkward and uncomfortable and unlike anything either had experienced. But it was also, somehow, right. Because they were facing it together, two people who'd chosen each other against all odds and were determined to make that choice mean something. Good night, Alara, Rowan said into the darkness. Good night, Rowan. Neither of them slept much that first night, but as the days passed and they fell into a new rhythm, the awkwardness faded. Not entirely. There would always be an element of awareness, of consideration, of the unusual circumstances that had brought them to this point. But slowly, surely, sharing a room became less strange and more natural. Like everything else in their relationship, they were learning as they went, building something new from the ashes of their old lives. And as the day of the trial approached, they did so knowing that whatever happened in that courtroom, they would face it as partners, as a team, as husband and wife, in all the ways that mattered. The journey to Helena took 2 full days, and every mile felt like a march toward judgment. They left the cabin before dawn on the 7th day, their supplies packed, the cabin secured against their absence. Copper carried them both again, steady and patient despite the long journey ahead. The weather held, cold but clear, the kind of bitter winter morning that made breath visible and turned the world into crystalline beauty. Alara rode behind Rowan, her arms around his waist, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body against the cold. They'd grown accustomed to this closeness over the past week, the physical proximity that came with sharing a bed and a life. It no longer felt awkward or forced. It simply was. Nervous? Rowan asked as they descended into a valley, Helena still a day's ride ahead. Terrified, she admitted. You? Same, but we're prepared. Catherine's good at what she does. And if being prepared isn't enough? His hand found hers where it rested against his stomach, squeezing gently. Then we fight harder. We don't give up, Alara. Not after everything we've been through. They stopped for the night at a small roadside inn, a weathered structure that offered warmth and basic accommodations. The innkeeper, a round woman with shrewd eyes, looked them over with obvious curiosity. "Just passing through?" she asked as Rowan signed the register. "Business in Helena," he replied, his tone discouraging further questions. Ah. But her eyes lingered on Alara, noting the way she stood close to Rowan, the wedding band on her finger that he'd carved from a piece of silver 3 days ago. "Well, you'll want the room upstairs, second door on the right. Dinner's in an hour if you're hungry." The room was small but clean, with a single bed that took up most of the space. They'd grown used to sharing, but something about being in a public inn made it feel different, more exposed, more observed. "I'll sleep on the floor," Rowan offered, eyeing the limited space. "Don't be ridiculous. We've shared a bed for a week." Alara set down her bag, practical as always. "Besides, if anyone asks tomorrow, we need to be able to honestly say we shared a room. You're getting good at thinking like a lawyer. I'm getting good at survival." She moved to the window, looking out at the darkening landscape. "Rowan, what happens if we lose, if the judge rules against us?" He came to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel his presence but not touching. "Then we appeal. We fight it in a higher court. We don't stop until we've exhausted every option. And if we exhaust every option and still lose, then we run." His voice was firm, certain. "I won't let them take you, Alara. Legal ruling or not, you're my wife, and I protect what's mine. We'll disappear into the mountains where no one can find us. Live off the land, move when we need to. It's not the life you deserve, but it's better than the alternative." She turned to face him, searching his expression in the fading light. "You do that? Give up your home? Your land? Everything you've built?" "I already lost everything once. I survived it. I'd survive it again if it meant keeping you safe." He reached up, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture that had become familiar between them, intimate without being presumptuous. "Besides, home isn't a place anymore. It's wherever you are." The confession hung between them, weighted with meaning neither of them was quite ready to fully acknowledge. Alara felt her heart contract, emotions she'd been carefully managing suddenly surging to the surface. "When did this become real for you?" she whispered. "When did it stop being just protection and start being something more?" Rowan was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know that there was a specific moment. It was gradual, waking up and hearing you humming while you made breakfast, watching you stand up to those men at the cabin, learning that you're brave and stubborn and kind, even after everything that's been done to you. Somewhere in all of that, you stopped being the woman I was helping and became the woman I couldn't imagine living without." "I feel the same way," she admitted, the words coming easier than she'd expected. "This started as survival, but it's become so much more. You've become so much more." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned from years of mountain living. "After the trial, when this is settled, one way or another, we need to talk about what this marriage really is, what we want it to be." "Why not talk about it now?" "Because right now, we're focused on survival. I want us to have that conversation when we're free to choose without fear driving the decision." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. "I want you to be sure, Alara, sure that you're not just grateful or scared or caught up in the intensity of the situation. I want you to choose this, choose me, because it's what you truly want. And if I'm already sure, then it'll still be true after the trial." He leaned forward, pressing his forehead against hers. "Be patient with me. I need to know I'm not taking advantage of you, even unintentionally. That matters to me." She understood, even as part of her wanted to protest, that she was already certain, that she knew her own heart. But his caution came from a place of respect, and that respect was part of what made her feelings for him so strong. "After the trial, then," she agreed. "But Rowan, whatever happens in that courtroom, whatever the judge decides, I'm choosing you. I need you to know that." "I know," he said softly, "and I'm choosing you too. Every day I'm choosing you." They stood there for a moment longer, foreheads touching, breathing the same air before the sound of footsteps in the hallway reminded them where they were. They stepped apart, both acutely aware that tomorrow would bring them face to face with Marcus Thorne and the system that had tried to make her his property. Dinner in the inn's common room was simple but filling. They ate quietly, aware of the other travelers watching them with varying degrees of interest. A young couple clearly in love, the observers would think. They had no idea how complicated the truth was, or how simple, depending on how you looked at it. That night, lying in the narrow inn bed, Alara found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. Rowan's breathing was steady beside her, but she could tell from the way he occasionally shifted that he wasn't sleeping either. "Tell me about your daughter," she said into the darkness. "About Emma. What was she like?" He was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then his voice came, soft and textured with memory. She had Sarah's eyes, dark and bright, always curious about everything. She'd ask 100 questions about the simplest things. Why is the sky blue? Where do stars go during the day? Why do birds sing? I'd try to answer, and she'd just ask 3 more questions based on my answers. Alara smiled in the darkness. She sounds wonderful. She was. And exhausting. Sarah used to joke that Emma would either become a scholar or drive her teachers to madness, possibly both. His hand found Alara's under the blanket, fingers intertwining. She loved stories. Every night I'd have to make up a new adventure for her. Knights and dragons and brave princesses who rescued themselves. She always insisted the princesses do their own rescuing. Smart girl. She would have liked you. You're exactly the kind of princess she believed in. The kind who doesn't wait to be saved. Alara squeezed his hand. Thank you for telling me about her. About them both. It's time I did. I've spent 6 years trying not to remember, thinking that would hurt less. But talking about them with you, it doesn't hurt less exactly, but it feels right. Like they deserve to be remembered, not buried. He shifted closer, his shoulder touching hers. Sarah would have approved of you, I think. She always had good instincts about people. I wish I could have met them. Me too. They fell silent again, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind built on shared vulnerability and growing trust. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them both, pulling them into sleep. Helena appeared on the horizon just after noon the next day, a sprawling territorial capital that made Coldwater look like a whistle stop. Buildings of stone and brick lined wide streets, and even in winter, the town bustled with activity. Miners, merchants, lawyers, politicians, all the machinery of territorial governance grinding forward. Catherine met them at her office, a tidy space above a dry goods store with windows overlooking the main street. She looked them over critically as they entered, noting their travel-worn state. Good. You're early. We have work to do. She gestured to chairs. The trial's set for tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Judge Morrison's chambers, Territorial Courthouse. Thorne's legal team arrived yesterday. 3 lawyers from back east, all with impressive credentials. 3 lawyers? Alara felt her stomach drop. We can't afford... You have me, and I'm worth at least 2 of them. Catherine's smile was sharp. Don't let the numbers intimidate you. More lawyers often means more confusion, not better representation. Now, let's review your testimony one more time. They spent the afternoon going over every detail, every possible question, every angle Thorne's lawyers might pursue. Catherine was relentless, playing devil's advocate, poking holes in their story, forcing them to defend their marriage again and again until the answers came naturally and without hesitation. Why did you marry her, Mr. Hale? Because she needed help, and I was in a position to provide it. But that's not a reason to marry someone. That's a reason to offer shelter. It became more than shelter. It became partnership, commitment, a choice to stand together against people who thought they could own her. And the fact that marriage conveniently nullified Mr. Thorne's contract, that was just a fortunate side effect? No, that was the catalyst, but what grew from it, that's what makes it real. Catherine nodded, satisfied, then turned to Alara. Mrs. Hale, be honest with me. Do you love your husband? The question caught Alara off guard. They'd discussed everything else, but not this, not in such direct terms. She glanced at Rowan, saw him watching her carefully, waiting for her answer. Yes, she said, and realized it was true. Fully, completely true. I love him. Why? Because he saved my life when he could have turned me away. Because he's honorable and kind despite everything he's suffered. Because he treats me like a partner, not property. Because he makes me feel safe and valued and seen. The words came easier now, flowing from a place of certainty. Because somewhere in these past weeks, he stopped being my protector and became my home. Catherine's expression softened slightly. Good. That's what you tell the judge if he asks. Not the legal arguments, not the logistics, just that truth. Because that truth is what will save you. She turned to Rowan. And you, do you love her? With everything I have left in me to give, Rowan said without hesitation. Which isn't much after 6 years of trying not to feel anything, but it's hers if she wants it. She wants it, Ilara said softly. Catherine closed her notebook with a decisive snap. Then we have our case. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be the longest day of your lives. They found lodging at a boarding house near the courthouse. A modest room, but clean and private. The owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, showed them upstairs with a knowing smile. Newlyweds? She asked. Is it that obvious? Ilara replied. You've got that look, like you're still learning each other, still surprised by what you're discovering. Mrs. Chen patted Ilara's hand. My husband and I were the same way. 43 years we had together before he passed. Every one of them a discovery. After she left, Ilara stood at the window, watching the last light fade from the sky. Tomorrow would determine everything, their marriage, her freedom, their future together. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders like a physical thing. Rowan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pulling her back against his chest. It was a gesture that had become natural between them, this easy physical affection that spoke of trust and growing intimacy. Whatever happens tomorrow, he murmured against her hair, you need to know something. Meeting you, helping you, marrying you. It woke something in me I thought was dead. You gave me a reason to care about the world again, to fight for something beyond just existing. No matter what the judge says, that won't change. Ilara turned in his arms, looking up at his face. I'm scared. I know, me too. Hold me? Always. They moved to the bed, lying down fully clothed, wrapped in each other's arms. There was nothing improper about it, just two people finding comfort in each other on the eve of a battle that would determine their fate. But there was also everything meaningful about it, this physical manifestation of the emotional bond they'd built. Sleep came eventually, fitful and interrupted by anxiety. But whenever Ilara woke, she found Rowan there, solid, steady, real, her anchor in the storm. Morning arrived too quickly. They dressed with care, Ilara in the one good dress she'd brought, Rowan in his cleanest shirt and jacket. Catherine met them outside the courthouse, looking sharp and focused. Remember, she said as they climbed the steps, answer only what's asked. Don't volunteer information. If you don't understand a question, say so. And above all, tell the truth. The truth is your strongest defense. The courtroom was smaller than Ilara had imagined, but it felt massive with the weight of what it represented. Judge Morrison sat at the bench, a man in his 60s with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Thorne's legal team occupied one table, an impressive array of suited men with expensive briefcases. Catherine sat alone at the other table, but she looked entirely unintimidated. And there, in the gallery behind his lawyers, sat Marcus Thorne himself. Ilara felt her breath catch. She'd seen him only once before that night in her father's house when he'd explained what her servitude would entail. He looked exactly as she remembered, well-dressed, confident, with cold eyes that assessed her like merchandise. He smiled when their eyes met. It wasn't a kind smile. Rowan's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tightly. She squeezed back, drawing strength from his presence. All rise, the bailiff announced. The Territorial Court of Montana is now in session, the Honorable Judge William Morrison presiding. The judge settled into his seat, reviewing papers before him. We're here today to hear arguments in the matter of Thorne versus Hale regarding a petition for annulment. Mr. Patterson, you're representing the petitioner? One of Thorne's lawyers stood, a tall man with silver hair and an air of practiced authority. Yes, Your Honor. Edmund Patterson, representing Mr. Marcus Thorne in his petition to annul the fraudulent marriage between Miss Ilara Quinn and Mr. Rowan Hale. Mrs. Hale, Ilara said clearly, surprising herself. My name is Mrs. Ilara Hale. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose slightly, but there might have been approval in his expression. Noted. Miss Brennan, you're representing the respondents? Catherine stood. Yes, Your Honor. The defense will show that the marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Hale is entirely legal and genuine, entered into with full consent and proper procedure. Then let's proceed. Mr. Patterson, your opening statement. Patterson moved to the center of the room with the smooth confidence of a man who'd won many cases. Your Honor, this case is about fraud, pure and simple. Miss Quinn, he emphasized the name, ignoring Alara's correction, entered into a legal and binding contract with my client, Mr. Thorne. That contract stipulated 7 years of domestic service to settle a debt of $20,000 incurred by her father. He paced as he spoke, his voice carrying easily through the courtroom. Rather than honor that legal obligation, Miss Quinn fled in the night. She then conspired with Mr. Hale, a known recluse with no prior connection to her, to fraudulently marry in order to circumvent the contract's terms. This marriage was not entered into out of love or genuine commitment. It was a legal dodge, plain and simple. We will demonstrate, Patterson continued, that Miss Quinn and Mr. Hale barely knew each other before their hasty marriage, that their union was motivated entirely by convenience, not affection, that they have no genuine history together, no real partnership, and no intention of fulfilling the duties and obligations of a true marriage. In short, Your Honor, this is a sham marriage designed solely to defraud my client of his legal rights under a valid contract. He returned to his seat with a final flourish. We ask that the court annul this marriage and order Miss Quinn return to fulfill her contractual obligations. The word returned made Alara's skin crawl, like she was lost property to be retrieved. But Catherine was already rising, her expression calm and collected. Your Honor, she began, the defense does not dispute that the marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Hale was entered into quickly, or that it provided Mrs. Hale with legal protection from Mr. Thorne's contract. What we dispute is the characterization of that contract as valid, and the claim that this marriage is fraudulent. She moved to stand before the judge's bench. The contract in question was not between Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Hale. It was between Mr. Thorne and Thomas Quinn, Mrs. Hale's father, who signed away his daughter's freedom without her knowledge or consent. Even if we accept that such debt bondage contracts are legal under territorial statute, this particular contract violates the fundamental principle that one person cannot sign away another's liberty. Moreover, Catherine continued, warming to her argument, the marriage between Mr. and Mrs. Hale is genuine in every way that matters. They chose each other, committed to each other, and have built a life together. That this marriage also protected Mrs. Hale from an unjust contract doesn't make it fraudulent, it makes it sensible. People marry for many reasons, Your Honor. Legal protection is no less valid than financial security, social advancement, or family expectation, all of which are commonly accepted motivations for marriage. She returned to her table. The defense will show that Mr. and Mrs. Hale have a genuine marital relationship, that they are committed to building a life together, and that their marriage deserves the full protection of this court. We ask that you deny Mr. Thorne's petition and affirm the validity of their union. Judge Morrison made notes, then looked up. Mr. Patterson, call your first witness. The petitioner calls Thomas Quinn. Alara's head snapped up. What? She whispered to Catherine. He's here, Catherine murmured back grimly. I should have anticipated this. The bailiff called the name again, and from the back of the courtroom, Alara's father emerged. He looked worse than when she'd last seen him, thinner, older, with the haunted look of a man being eaten alive by guilt and consequences. He wouldn't meet Alara's eyes as he took the witness stand. Patterson approached him like a shark scenting blood. Mr. Quinn, please state your relationship to the defendant, Miss Alara Quinn. I'm her father. His voice was barely audible. Speak up, please, Mr. Quinn. You're her father. And you entered into a contract with Mr. Marcus Thorne regarding your daughter, did you not? Yes. Can you explain the circumstances of that contract? Thomas Quinn's hands twisted in his lap. I owed Mr. Thorne money, a lot of money, $20,000. He offered to settle the debt through a labor contract with my daughter, 7 years of domestic service. It was legal, witnessed, properly executed. And did you discuss this arrangement with your daughter before signing? No. The admission was pulled from him like a tooth. I didn't tell her until 2 days before Mr. Thorne was supposed to collect her. How did she react? She was upset, angry, said I had no right to sign away her freedom. And yet, you had every legal right, did you not? As her father and legal guardian at the time. Quinn's face twisted. Legal right, yes. Moral right, that's different. Patterson's expression showed satisfaction. Mr. Quinn, when you learned that your daughter had married Rowan Hale, what was your reaction? I was surprised. Elara didn't know anyone in these parts, and I'd never heard of Rowan Hale. Did it occur to you that this marriage might be fraudulent, entered into solely to avoid the contract you'd signed? Catherine stood. Objection. Calls for speculation. Your Honor, Patterson countered. Mr. Quinn's opinion as the bride's father is relevant to establishing the genuineness of the marriage. I'll allow it, Morrison said. Answer the question, Mr. Quinn. Quinn finally looked at Elara, and she saw the misery in his eyes. Yes, it occurred to me. The timing was too convenient. Elara marries a stranger days after running from Thorne's contract? It seemed like exactly what it was, a way to break the agreement. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. No further questions. Catherine rose for cross-examination. Mr. Quinn, you testified that you had no moral right to sign away your daughter's freedom. Can you elaborate on that? I traded her like property to save myself. It was wrong. And the contract itself, what exactly did it stipulate your daughter would do during these 7 years of domestic service? Quinn's face paled. General household duties, Mr. Thorne said. Did Mr. Thorne specify what those duties would include? He said Elara would live in his house, follow his orders, and fulfill whatever duties he required of her. Whatever duties he required, Catherine repeated slowly. Mr. Quinn, you're not a naive man. What did you understand that phrase to mean? Objection. Patterson was on his feet. The contract's language speaks for itself. Your Honor, Mr. Quinn's understanding of what he was signing is absolutely relevant, Catherine argued. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Quinn. Quinn's voice was barely a whisper. I understood it meant she would have to do whatever he wanted. Anything, with no right to refuse. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Morrison's expression darkened. And knowing that, Catherine pressed, you signed the contract anyway? I was desperate. I was scared. I told myself it was only 7 years, that Elara was strong enough to survive it. His voice broke. I was wrong. I was a coward and a fool, and I deserve every bit of suffering that's come to me since. One final question, Mr. Quinn. Your daughter is now married to Rowan Hale. Do you believe that marriage has harmed her in any way? No. For the first time, Quinn's voice was firm. From what I've heard, Hale treats her with respect, protects her, values her. Everything I should have done and didn't. If their marriage is fraudulent, it's a better fraud than the legal contract I signed with Thorne. Catherine returned to her seat. No further questions. Quinn left the stand, and this time he did meet Elara's eyes. The look he gave her was one of profound apology, an equally profound relief that she was free of what he'd tried to force on her. Patterson called several more witnesses, people from Coldwater who testified to Rowan's reclusive nature, to the sudden appearance of Elara, to their hasty marriage. Each testimony built a picture of convenience rather than commitment, of legal strategy rather than genuine love. But then Catherine had her turn. She called preacher Franklin Wells, who testified to the earnestness he'd seen in both Rowan and Elara when they'd come to him seeking marriage. She called Martha and Bill Henderson, who described the way the couple had held hands during the ceremony, the look in their eyes that spoke of more than simple expediency. And then she called Marshal Garrett, who recounted the armed assault on Rowan's cabin and the clear evidence that Rowan was willing to risk his life to protect his wife. That's not the action of a man in a fraudulent marriage, Your Honor, Garrett testified. That's the action of a man defending his family. But Patterson's most damaging moment came when he put Marcus Thorne himself on the stand. Thorne cut an impressive figure, confident, well-spoken, playing the role of a aggrieved businessman with practiced ease. He described the contract as a simple business arrangement, painted Elara's flight as a breach of legal obligation, and characterized the marriage as an obvious fraud. Mr. Hale is a known recluse, Thorne said smoothly. He's had no contact with society for 6 years. The idea that he spontaneously developed feelings for a woman he'd just met, a woman who conveniently needed legal protection from a contract, strains credulity. This is clearly a marriage of convenience, not commitment. Catherine approached for cross-examination with a dangerous gleam in her eyes. Mr. Thorne, You've characterized your contract with Thomas Quinn as a simple business arrangement, but the contract specified that Miss Quinn, Mrs. Hale, would fulfill whatever duties required of her. Can you elaborate on what duties you anticipated? Standard household management, cooking, cleaning, general domestic responsibilities, for which you felt $20,000 was appropriate compensation? The debt was $20,000. The labor contract was how Quinn chose to settle it. I see. And these domestic responsibilities, would Mrs. Hale have had the right to refuse any particular task? The contract specified she would follow my directions. All your directions? Even those unrelated to housekeeping? Thorne's eyes narrowed. I'm a fair employer, Ms. Brennan. I wouldn't have asked anything unreasonable. That's not what I asked. I asked whether she would have the right to refuse, yes or no. The contract gave her no such right, no. So if you demanded she share your bed, she would have had no legal right to refuse, correct? Objection, Patterson thundered. Inflammatory speculation. Your Honor, Catherine shot back. I'm simply asking Mr. Thorne to clarify the terms of his contract. Judge Morrison leaned forward. I'll allow it. Answer the question, Mr. Thorne. Thorne's jaw tightened. The contract didn't specify sleeping arrangements. Because it didn't need to, did it? Because whatever duties required covered everything, including intimacies you had no right to demand. Catherine let the implication hang in the air. No further questions. The damage was done. Thorne's expression as he left the stand told Alara that Catherine had drawn blood, exposing the truth everyone had suspected but he'd carefully avoided stating outright. Finally, it was time for Alara and Rowan to testify. Patterson called Rowan first, clearly hoping to trap him into admissions that would undermine their case. Mr. Hale, how long had you known Miss Quinn before you married her? 3 days. 3 days. And in those 3 days, you fell so deeply in love that you felt compelled to marry her? No. In those 3 days, I learned enough about her character to know she was worth fighting for. That's not the same as love, is it? Love grows, Mr. Patterson. It starts with respect, with admiration, with choosing to stand beside someone. The deeper feelings come with time. So you admit you didn't love her when you married her? I admit I didn't know her well enough to name what I felt, but I knew I wanted to protect her, support her, build something with her. If that's not the beginning of love, I don't know what is. Patterson pressed harder. Your marriage was convenient for Miss Quinn, wasn't it? It nullified Mr. Thorne's contract. It protected her from an unjust situation, yes. And you expect this court to believe that convenience had nothing to do with your decision to marry? I expect this court to recognize that sometimes doing the right thing and doing the convenient thing are the same thing. Rowan's voice was steady, unshaken. Yes, our marriage protected Alara, but it also committed me to her safety, her well-being, her future. That commitment is real, Mr. Patterson, whether you choose to see it or not. When Patterson finished, Catherine's questions were brief, designed to humanize rather than defend. Mr. Hale, what's your wife's favorite tea? Chamomile with honey, but she'll drink whatever's available without complaining. What does she do first thing every morning? Braids her hair while standing by the window watching the sunrise. What makes her laugh? Stories about Emma, my daughter. Alara loves hearing about the ridiculous questions Emma used to ask. Simple questions, simple answers. But they painted a picture of intimacy, of daily life shared, of attention paid to small details that only someone living with and caring for another person would know. Then it was Alara's turn. She took the stand with her heart hammering, acutely aware that everything depended on the next few minutes. Patterson circled like a predator. Mrs. Hale, or should I say Miss Quinn? Mrs. Hale, she corrected firmly. You ran from Mr. Thorne's contract rather than fulfill it. Why? Because the contract treated me like property, not a person. I couldn't accept that. But it was a legal contract, properly executed. Your father had the right to sign it. Legal doesn't mean moral. Legal doesn't mean right. Alara's voice strengthened. And no, my father didn't have the right to trade away my freedom, my body, my life. Not morally, not in any way that matters. So you decided you were above the law? I decided I was a human being with the right to determine my own fate. If that makes me a criminal, then I'll wear that label proudly. Judge Morrison's expression was unreadable, but he was listening intently. Patterson changed tactics. You married Mr. Hale very quickly, some might say suspiciously quickly. We married quickly because we were being pursued by armed men who wanted to drag me back to Mr. Thorne. We didn't have the luxury of a long courtship. How convenient. How necessary, Alara shot back. And yes, our marriage started as protection. But it became something more. It became partnership, respect, trust. It became love. Those feelings didn't erase the practical reasons for our marriage. They grew alongside them. You claim to love Mr. Hale after knowing him mere weeks. I claim to love the man who saved my life, who stood between me and armed men, who treats me as an equal rather than property. I claim to love the man who listens when I speak, who values my opinion, who makes me feel safe and valued and seen. Is that so impossible to believe, Mr. Patterson? Patterson smiled coldly. It's impossible to believe when the timing is so conveniently aligned with avoiding a legal obligation. Then you've never been desperate, Alara said quietly. You've never had to make impossible choices with your life hanging in the balance. I don't expect you to understand, but I do expect this court to recognize that marrying for protection doesn't make a marriage false any more than marrying for money or status does, and those marriages happen every day without anyone questioning their validity. When Catherine's turn came for redirect, she asked only one question. Mrs. Hale, if this court annuls your marriage today, if Judge Morrison rules in Mr. Thorne's favor, what will you do? Alara looked directly at the judge. I'll run. I'll disappear into the mountains and I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, because I will never, never allow myself to be owned by Marcus Thorne or anyone else. I'd rather die free than live as property. The courtroom fell silent. Even Patterson seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Morrison cleared his throat. Does either side wish to present closing arguments? Both lawyers did, Patterson reiterating his fraud claims, Catherine arguing for the validity of a marriage built on respect and genuine commitment. But Alara barely heard them. Her eyes found Rowan's across the room, and she saw in his expression the same fierce determination she felt. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Finally, Morrison raised his hand for silence. I've heard enough. This court will take a brief recess while I review the evidence and prepare my ruling. We'll reconvene in 1 hour. The longest hour of Alara's life followed. She and Rowan sat in a small side room with Catherine, none of them able to eat or drink or do anything but wait. However this goes, Catherine said quietly, you fought well, both of you. Will it be enough? Alara asked. I honestly don't know. Morrison's fair, but he's also bound by legal precedent and territorial statute. It could go either way. When the bailiff finally called them back into the courtroom, Alara felt like she was walking to her own execution. Rowan's hand in hers was the only thing keeping her upright. Judge Morrison looked at them both, his expression grave, and began to speak. I've presided over this court for 23 years, Judge Morrison began, his voice filling the silent courtroom. In that time, I've seen marriages entered into for every reason imaginable: love, money, family obligation, social advancement, even spite. The law doesn't require love for a marriage to be valid. It requires consent, proper procedure, and the intent to enter into a legal union. By those standards, the marriage between Rowan Hale and Alara Quinn meets every requirement. Alara felt her breath catch. Beside her, Rowan's hand tightened around hers. However, Morrison continued, and her heart plummeted, Mr. Thorne's petition raises legitimate questions about the timing and motivation of this union. A marriage entered into solely to circumvent legal obligations can indeed be considered fraudulent, regardless of whether proper procedure was followed. He paused, reviewing his notes. The silence stretched unbearably. The question before this court is not whether Mr. and Mrs. Hale followed proper marriage procedure. They clearly did. The question is whether their marriage was entered into with genuine intent to build a life together, or whether it was merely a legal maneuver designed to nullify Mr. Thorne's contract. Morrison looked up, his gaze moving between Alara and Rowan. Having heard the testimony and reviewed the evidence, I find myself confronted with two competing narratives. The first, presented by Mr. Thorne's counsel, paints a picture of calculated fraud, a desperate woman and an isolated man conspiring to break a legal contract through false marriage. Alara's stomach twisted. This was it. They were going to lose. The second narrative, Morrison continued, is more nuanced. It acknowledges the practical motivations for this marriage while also recognizing the genuine partnership that appears to have developed. Mr. Hale's testimony regarding his wife's daily habits, Mrs. Hale's clear affection and respect for her husband, the willingness of both parties to defend this union, even in the face of legal and physical threats, these are not the hallmarks of a fraudulent arrangement. He set down his papers and leaned forward. Mr. Thorne, I'm troubled by your contract with Thomas Quinn. While debt bondage contracts are technically permissible under territorial statute, the vague language regarding whatever duties required opens the door to exploitation that I find deeply disturbing. Your cross-examination did nothing to alleviate those concerns. Thorne's face darkened, but he said nothing. Furthermore, Morrison said, I'm troubled by the fact that this contract was signed without Miss Quinn's, Mrs. Hale's, knowledge or consent. While Thomas Quinn had legal authority as her father, the spirit of the law requires that individuals being bound to service have some say in that binding. This contract violated that spirit, if not its letter. Hope began to kindle in Alara's chest, fragile and terrifying. As for the marriage itself, the judge continued, I find the evidence supports the conclusion that while this union may have been entered into quickly and for practical reasons, it has developed into a genuine partnership. The testimony of both parties demonstrates knowledge of and affection for each other that cannot be easily fabricated. Their willingness to defend this marriage, even at great personal cost, speaks to commitment that goes beyond mere legal convenience. Morrison picked up his gavel, and Alara felt the world narrow to that single point, the weapon that would either save them or destroy them. Therefore, it is the ruling of this court that the marriage between Rowan Hale and Alara Hale is valid and legally binding. Mr. Thorne's petition for annulment is denied. The gavel came down with a crack that echoed through the courtroom like thunder. For a moment, Alara couldn't process what she'd heard. The words seemed to float in the air, disconnected from meaning. Then Rowan turned to her, his expression breaking into something she'd never seen before, pure, unguarded joy. And she understood. They'd won. Furthermore, Morrison continued over the rising murmur in the courtroom, I'm declaring the contract between Marcus Thorne and Thomas Quinn null and void on the grounds that it violates the fundamental principle that one person cannot sign away another's liberty without that person's informed consent. Mrs. Hale is free of any obligation to Mr. Thorne, now and forever. The gavel came down again, final and absolute. Catherine was speaking to them, something about legal protections and filing additional paperwork, but Alara barely heard her. She was looking at Rowan, seeing tears track down his weathered face, and she realized she was crying too. It's over, she whispered. We're free. You're free, he corrected, pulling her into his arms. You were always free. Now everyone else knows it too. Behind them, she heard Marcus Thorne's voice raised in protest, Patterson arguing about appeals and legal recourse. But Morrison was already dismissing them, his ruling standing firm. The battle was over, and they had won. They barely remembered leaving the courthouse. Catherine handled the paperwork, ensuring all the legal documentation was properly filed and recorded. Marshal Garrett appeared at some point, congratulating them and promising to ensure Thorne didn't try any additional retaliation. Mrs. Chen from the boarding house hugged Alara with genuine happiness when they returned, but it all felt distant, like it was happening to someone else. The only real thing was Rowan's hand in hers, the solid presence of him beside her, the knowledge that they were finally, truly safe. That evening, they stood at the window of their boarding house room, watching the sun set over Helena. The town was settling into its evening rhythm, lamps being lit, shops closing, people heading home to their families. Normal life carrying on as if the world hadn't just fundamentally shifted. What do we do now? Alara asked softly. We've spent weeks preparing for this fight. Now that it's over, I almost don't know what comes next. Rowan pulled her back against his chest, his arms wrapping around her waist. Now we live. We go home to the cabin, and we build the life we've been too busy fighting for to actually plan. And what kind of life do you want? One with you in it. Everything else is negotiable. She turned in his arms, looking up at him. You said after the trial we'd talk about what this marriage really is, about what we want it to be. I did say that. So let's talk. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender despite the calluses. I want this to be real, Alara. Not just legally real, but real in every way. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep next to you every night. I want to know every story from your childhood and make new stories with you. I want to build a bigger cabin because eventually the one we have will be too small. I want to love you the way you deserve to be loved. Completely, fiercely, without reservation. That sounds like a plan, she said, her voice thick with emotion. But you're missing something. What's that? The part where I want exactly the same things. Where I love you just as completely and fiercely. Where I choose you every single day, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine choosing anyone else. She rose on her toes, bringing her face level with his. I love you, Rowan Hale. Not because you saved me, not because you protected me, but because you're kind and brave and you make me believe in second chances. He kissed her then, soft at first, tentative, as if he still couldn't quite believe this was allowed. But when she responded, threading her fingers through his hair and pulling him closer, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of weeks of growing desire finally unleashed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Rowan rested his forehead against hers. I should tell you something. I haven't been with anyone since Sarah died. 7 years. I'm out of practice at this. I've never been with anyone, Alara admitted. So we'll figure it out together, just like everything else. Together, he agreed, and kissed her again. What followed was tender and awkward and perfect in its imperfection. Two people learning each other, discovering what brought pleasure and what brought laughter. Building intimacy not just physical, but emotional. There was fumbling and whispered questions and moments of uncertainty, but there was also trust and care and the overwhelming knowledge that this was right. Afterward, lying tangled together in the narrow bed, Alara traced patterns on Rowan's chest while he played with her unbraided hair. Outside, Helena had gone quiet, the town settling into sleep. I never thought I'd have this, Rowan said quietly. After Sarah and Emma died, I thought that part of my life was over. That I'd used up my allotment of happiness and the rest would just be existing. And now? Now I know that happiness isn't an allotment, it's a choice. And I choose this. I choose you. Every day I choose you. Good, Alara said, pressing a kiss to his shoulder. Because you're stuck with me now. Legal, binding, and absolutely genuine. He laughed, a real laugh, full and deep and free. It was the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard. They left Helena 2 days later, after Catherine had finalized all the paperwork and ensured every legal protection was in place. The lawyer had refused payment beyond a modest fee, saying that defeating Marcus Thorne's exploitation was reward enough. Marshal Garrett had stopped by to provide them with a letter affirming their marriage's validity, should anyone question it in the future. The journey home felt different than the journey there. The fear and uncertainty had been replaced by a tentative joy, a growing confidence in what they were building together. They talked more easily now, comfortable silences interspersed with deeper conversations about their hopes and plans. I want to expand the cabin, Rowan said as they rode through familiar mountain passes. Add a proper bedroom with real windows, maybe a separate room for storage. The place was built for one person surviving, not 2 people living. I want a garden come spring, Alara added. Vegetables, herbs, maybe some flowers. Something living and growing that's ours. We could get chickens. Fresh eggs would be nice. And I want to learn to shoot properly. If we're going to live out here, I should know how to defend myself. I'll teach you, though hopefully we won't have any more armed visitors. Hopefully, she agreed, but I'd rather be prepared. They arrived at the cabin just as the sun was setting on the 3rd day of their return journey. The structure looked exactly as they'd left it, modest, sturdy, isolated. But to Alara, it looked like home. Their home, built not just from timber and stone, but from trust and choice and love. Rowan helped her down from copper, and they stood there for a moment, just looking at the place that would hold their future. Ready? He asked. Ready, she confirmed. Inside, everything was as they'd left it, preserved by the cold. Rowan immediately set about building a fire while Alara unpacked their supplies. The domestic routine felt natural now, each of them moving around the other with practiced ease. You know what I realized? Alara said as she put away the last of their provisions. This cabin doesn't feel empty anymore. When I first arrived, I could feel how lonely it was, how it was just a shelter, not a home, but now it feels alive. That's because it is, Rowan said, coaxing the fire to life. You brought life back to it, back to me. Over the following weeks, they settled into their new reality. The fear and urgency that had driven so much of their relationship gave way to something calmer but no less intense. They worked together to prepare for winter's full arrival, stocking supplies and fortifying the cabin. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, filling in the gaps in their knowledge of each other. Rowan taught Alara to shoot, patient and thorough as she learned to handle the rifle. She proved to be a surprisingly good marksman, her hands steady and her focus sharp. "You're a natural," he said after she hit her 10th target in a row. "Better than I was when I started." "I had a good teacher," she replied, handing the rifle back to him. "And motivation. I never want to feel helpless again." "You were never helpless, Alara. Desperate, maybe, trapped, but never helpless. Helpless people don't run into blizzards. They don't marry strangers to escape ownership. They don't stand up in court and declare they'd rather die free than live as property." She turned to him, struck by the fierceness in his voice. "You really see me that way? As brave?" "I see you as the bravest person I've ever met." He pulled her close, the rifle forgotten between them. "You survived your father's betrayal, Thorn's pursuit, a blizzard that should have killed you, armed men attacking our home, and a trial that could have stolen everything. And through it all, you never broke, never gave up, never accepted what others tried to force on you. If that's not bravery, I don't know what is." She buried her face in his chest, overwhelmed by the certainty in his words. "I was terrified every step of the way." That's what makes it brave. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's choosing to act despite it. As the days shortened and winter deepened its grip on the mountains, they found joy in small things. Alara taught Rowan songs her mother used to sing, her voice filling the cabin with melodies it had never known. Rowan carved small things for her, a comb, a small box for her few treasures, a frame for the marriage certificate Catherine had given them. They read to each other from the few books Rowan owned, discussed philosophy and politics and the changing world beyond their mountain sanctuary. They planned for spring, the garden Alara wanted, the expansion Rowan envisioned, possibly even a trip to Coldwater for supplies, and to visit Preacher Wells. But mostly, they simply lived. They learned the rhythms of each other's moods, the patterns of each other's thoughts. They discovered that Rowan was insufferably grumpy before his morning coffee, that Alara talked in her sleep sometimes, that both of them preferred the comfortable silence of companionship to forced conversation. They grew together in ways both profound and mundane, building a partnership that was stronger for having been forged in crisis, but sustained by choice. 3 months after the trial, on a bitter cold January morning, Rowan woke to find Alara already up, standing at the window in her nightdress, despite the cold. "You'll freeze," he said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders and pulling her back against his warmth. "I was watching the sunrise, thinking about how different everything is from a year ago. Better or worse? Infinitely better. A year ago, I was trapped in my father's house, living a half-life, not even knowing that he was planning to sell me to settle his debts. Now I'm here, in the middle of nowhere, with a man I love, building a life I chose. It's not what I ever imagined, but it's better than anything I could have imagined. Even though it's isolated, even though we're miles from civilization, especially because of that. Out here I'm free. No one tells me who I should be, what I should do, how I should act. I'm just Alara, your wife, my own person." She turned in his arms. "Are you happy, Rowan? Really happy?" "Yes." The answer came without hesitation. "For the first time in 7 years, I'm not just surviving, I'm living. You did that. You brought me back to life." "We did that together," she corrected. "You were already finding your way back. I just gave you a reason to make the journey." "A very good reason," he agreed, kissing her forehead. "The best reason." They stood there together, watching the sun paint the snow-covered peaks in shades of gold and rose, and felt the profound peace of knowing they were exactly where they were meant to be. But their peace was interrupted 2 weeks later by an unexpected visitor. They heard the horse approaching long before they saw the rider, the sound of hoofbeats carrying clearly through the still winter air. Both of them tensed, old habits of vigilance surging back. Rowan grabbed his rifle, moving to the door while Alara positioned herself where she could see but not be easily seen. They'd learned caution the hard way, but the rider who emerged from the tree line was familiar. Marshal Garrett, looking travel-worn and serious. Rowan lowered the rifle but didn't set it aside. "Marshal, this is unexpected." "Rowan, Mrs. Hale." Garrett dismounted, his horse steaming in the cold. "I need to talk to you both. May I come in?" They exchanged glances, then Alara nodded. Whatever this was, they'd face it together. Inside, with coffee warming his hands, Garrett got straight to the point. "Marcus Thorne is dead." The words hit like a physical blow. Alara felt her breath catch, her mind racing through implications and consequences. "How?" Rowan asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Fell from his horse 3 days ago. Broke his neck. His men say the horse spooked at something, threw him." Garrett's expression was unreadable. "Convenient timing, some might say." "What does that mean?" Alara asked, though she had a sinking feeling she knew. "It means there are people asking questions, wondering if maybe the horse didn't spook naturally, wondering if someone with a grudge against Thorne might have helped nature along." His eyes moved between them. "You two have the strongest motive of anyone in the territory." "We've been here for months," Rowan said flatly. "We haven't left this cabin except for supply runs to Coldwater. Half the town can verify that." "I know, and I've told anyone who'll listen that you had nothing to do with it. But Thorne's lawyers are making noise, and there are people who want someone to blame. Thought you should know what's being said." Alara set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. "After everything, after winning in court, after finally being free, they want to accuse us of murder? They want someone to be responsible. Thorne was powerful, had connections. His death leaves a vacuum, and people are uncomfortable with the idea that it might have just been an accident." Garrett leaned forward. "I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here to warn you. Stay visible. Make sure people see you going about normal life. Don't give anyone ammunition to claim you're hiding." "We're not hiding," Rowan said. "We're living. There's a difference." "I know that, but perception matters, especially now." Garrett stood, preparing to leave. "One more thing. Thorne's estate is being settled. He had no wife, no children. His lawyers are going through his affairs, and they found something interesting. Seems Thorne was involved in several other contracts similar to the one he had with your father, Mrs. Hale. Young women, debt bondage, vague terms about duties required." Alara felt sick. "How many?" "At least 4 that they've found documentation for, maybe more." Garrett's expression was grim. "Your case, your testimony in court, it's opened doors. Other women are coming forward, talking about what happened to them. The territorial government is investigating, possibly moving to outlaw these kinds of contracts entirely." "Because of us?" Alara's voice was barely a whisper. "Because of you. What you did, refusing to be owned, fighting for your freedom, it mattered. It's still mattering." He moved toward the door. "Thought you'd want to know that your fight didn't just save you, it's saving others." After he left, Alara and Rowan sat in silence, processing everything they'd learned. Thorne was dead. They were under suspicion. But their fight had sparked something larger, a reckoning with the system that allowed human beings to be contracted and controlled. "Do you think they'll try to charge us?" Alara finally asked. "No. Garrett wouldn't have warned us if he thought there was real evidence. He was just making sure we were prepared for the gossip." Rowan reached for her hand. "We didn't kill Thorne, Alara. Whatever happened to him, we weren't responsible." "I know, but part of me, a small, awful part, is glad he's dead. Does that make me terrible? It makes you human. He tried to own you, to break you. Feeling relief that he's gone isn't the same as wanting him dead." He squeezed her hand. "We're not murderers. We're survivors. There's a difference." "What about what Garrett said? About other women coming forward?" "That's because of your courage. You refused to accept what society tried to force on you, and now others are finding their own courage. That's not awful, Alara. That's extraordinary." She leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "I just want to live quietly, to build our life here without more drama, more fighting, more fear." "We will. This will pass. The investigation will conclude it was an accident, the gossip will fade, and we'll be left alone to live exactly as we choose." He kissed the top of her head. "We've survived worse than whispers and suspicion." He was right. Over the following weeks, they made a point of being visible. riding into Coldwater for supplies, attending Sunday service at Preacher Wells Church, being seen by their neighbors going about normal life. The suspicion lingered but never coalesced into anything concrete. Without evidence, the accusations remained just whispers. Meanwhile, news filtered in about the investigation into Thorne's business practices. The territorial legislature was indeed moving to ban debt bondage contracts, citing the testimony from Alara's trial as evidence of how such contracts could be abused. Women were coming forward with stories of exploitation and abuse, and a broader conversation was beginning about women's rights and legal protections. "You started something," Rowan told Alara one evening as they read a newspaper article about the proposed legislation. One woman standing up and saying no to being owned. "It's changing laws. I didn't mean to start a movement, I just wanted to be free." That's usually how movements start. Someone brave enough to take the first step, and others finding courage to follow. He folded the newspaper. "You should be proud." "I'm proud of us. We took that step together." "Together," he agreed, pulling her close. "Everything worth doing, we do together." Spring came slowly to the mountains, the snow retreating inch by inch, revealing brown earth that would soon burst into green life. Rowan began work on expanding the cabin, helped by occasional visits from men in Coldwater who'd heard about their story and wanted to support them. The hostility they'd faced had given way to a grudging respect, and then to something approaching admiration. Alara started her garden, carefully planting seeds they'd bought in town, nurturing them with the same fierce determination she'd applied to everything else. She also began teaching reading to children in Coldwater. Parents brought them to the general store where she'd set up a small classroom, eager for their children to have education. Life was busy, full, purposeful. The marriage that had started as survival had become a partnership in every sense, each of them supporting the other's dreams while building shared ones. On a warm May afternoon, 6 months after the trial, Alara stood in their expanded cabin, now with a proper bedroom, a small sitting area, and even a desk where she could prepare her lessons, and felt overwhelmed by how much had changed. Rowan came in from working on the new chicken coop, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. That's what's overwhelming me." She moved into his arms despite his protestations about being dirty and sweaty. "A year ago, I was running for my life, freezing to death in a blizzard, terrified of what the future held. Now I'm here, in this home we built together, teaching children to read, planning what vegetables to can for winter, married to the best man I've ever known. It feels like a dream." "If it's a dream, I don't want to wake up," Rowan murmured against her hair. "You've made my life mean something again, Alara, given me purpose beyond just surviving." "We've given each other that," she corrected, as she always did when he tried to give her all the credit. "We saved each other." "Maybe that's the truest kind of love. Not one person rescuing another, but two people choosing to save each other, over and over, in big ways and small ones." She pulled back to look up at him, seeing in his weathered face and gentle eyes the man who'd pulled her from a storm and never stopped fighting for her freedom. "I love you, Rowan Hale." "I love you too, Alara Hale. Today and every day after." They stood there in their home, built from determination, expanded with hope, filled with love, and knew that whatever challenges the future held, they would face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together, as partners, as best friends, as lovers, as two people who'd found in each other not just salvation, but home. The frontier was still harsh, the mountains still unforgiving, the world beyond their cabin still full of challenges and injustice. But here, in this small corner of Montana territory, two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other had proven that courage and choice could rewrite fate. Their story had started with a woman running from ownership and a man running from grief. It had become a tale of two people learning to trust again, to love again, to believe that second chances were possible. And now, standing in the life they'd built together, they understood the most important truth of all. Freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice, the daily decision to stand beside someone, to build something together, to face the world hand in hand. They were free. They were home. They were loved, and they were exactly where they were meant to be. Summer arrived in the mountains with a burst of wildflowers and green so vivid it hurt to look at. Alara's garden flourished beyond her expectations. rows of vegetables thriving in the mountain soil, herbs spreading their fragrance on warm breezes. The chickens Rowan had built the coop for were laying reliably, and the cabin felt more like a homestead than a hermit's refuge. But the peace they'd built was interrupted on a blazing July afternoon when Catherine Brennan arrived unexpectedly, her horse lathered from hard riding. Alara was in the garden, harvesting lettuce, when she heard Rowan call out. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw their lawyer dismounting in the clearing. Catherine's expression was grim. "Something's wrong," Alara said, already moving toward the cabin. Inside, Catherine accepted water but refused food, too agitated to sit still. "There's been a development. The territorial legislature passed the bill banning debt bondage contracts. Thorne's lawyers challenged it, claiming it violates existing agreements. The case is going before the Territorial Supreme Court next month." "But we won," Rowan said. "Our marriage was upheld. The contract was voided. What does this have to do with us?" "Everything. You're the test case that inspired the legislation. The Supreme Court wants to hear testimony about how these contracts were used and abused. They've specifically requested that Alara testify." Catherine's eyes were sharp with concern. "This is bigger than your individual case now. This is about setting precedent for the entire territory, maybe even influencing federal law." Alara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the weight of being watched, judged, made into a symbol rather than just a person. "Do I have to go?" "Legally? No, they can't compel you. But Alara, there are women still trapped in contracts like the one you escaped. Your testimony could free them. More than that, it could ensure no one else gets trapped in the future." "That's not fair," Rowan said quietly. "Asking her to relive all of it, to be scrutinized again, just so other people can feel good about doing the right thing." "No, it's not fair," Catherine agreed. "But neither was what happened to her. Neither is what's still happening to others. Sometimes doing the right thing means doing the hard thing, even when we've already done more than should be expected." Alara moved to the window, looking out at the life they'd built. The garden she'd planted, the expanded cabin, the peaceful existence they'd fought so hard for. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect this fragile happiness, to refuse to be a symbol or a martyr or anything except Rowan's wife living quietly in the mountains. But she thought about the women Catherine had mentioned, women still trapped, still being treated as property, still waiting for someone to stand up and say this was wrong. She thought about how alone she'd felt running through that blizzard, and how different things might have been if someone had fought this battle before her. "I'll do it," she said, turning back to face them. "I'll testify." "Alara, you don't have to," Rowan started, but she held up her hand. "I know I don't have to, but I want to. Not for them, not for the legislature or the Supreme Court. For the women who are where I was, desperate, trapped, thinking there's no way out." She moved to stand beside Rowan, taking his hand. "Someone has to stand up and say this is wrong. If that someone has to be me, then so be it." Catherine nodded, respect clear in her expression. "The hearing is in 4 weeks. I'll prepare you, but Alara, this won't be like the trial. This is about policy and precedent. They'll ask detailed questions about the contract, about what Thorne intended, about the implications for women's rights. It'll be uncomfortable." "Everything worth doing is uncomfortable," Alara replied. "When do we leave?" The next 4 weeks were a blur of preparation. Catherine visited regularly, drilling Alara on potential questions, helping her craft testimony that was both emotionally compelling and legally sound. But she also pushed Alara to go deeper, to articulate not just what happened to her, but what it meant, the psychological impact of being treated as property, the systemic issues that allowed such contracts to exist, the broader implications for women's autonomy. "You're not just telling your story anymore," Catherine explained during one particularly intense session. "You're representing a principle that human beings cannot be bought, sold, or contracted like livestock. The court needs to understand not just that your specific situation was unjust, but that the entire system enabling it is fundamentally wrong." Rowan watched these sessions with growing concern, seeing the toll they took on Alara. She'd wake in the night sometimes, anxiety pulling her from sleep, and he'd hold her while she worked through her fears about testifying again. "What if I'm not eloquent enough?" she asked one night, curled against his chest. "What if I can't make them understand?" "You'll make them understand because you're speaking truth." That's all you need to be, honest about what happened and why it was wrong. He stroked her hair, soothing. And remember, you're not alone this time. I'll be right there with you. You can't testify for me. No, but I can remind you that whatever happens in that courtroom, you're coming home to a life we built together. The court can rule however it wants, but it can't take away what we have. His certainty helped, but the anxiety remained. Alara threw herself into work to manage it, tending the garden with almost obsessive care, teaching her students with extra attention, helping Rowan with the endless tasks of maintaining their homestead. Anything to keep her mind occupied and away from the looming testimony. A week before they were scheduled to leave for Helena, Preacher Wells visited with unexpected news. He arrived in the late afternoon, his expression troubled. "I've been contacted by several families in the territory," he told them over dinner. "Women who were in contracts similar to yours, Alara. They've heard about the Supreme Court case, and they want to testify too, but they're afraid of retribution from the men who hold their contracts, afraid of public judgment, afraid of what speaking out might cost them." "How many women?" Alara asked quietly. "7 that I know of. Could be more who haven't come forward." Wells set down his fork. "They asked if you'd meet with them. They want to hear from you, how you found the courage, how you survived the trial, what it cost, and whether it was worth it." Alara looked at Rowan, saw the concern in his eyes, but also understanding. This was her choice to make. "Where are they?" "Staying at a safe house in Coldwater. The woman running it is named Margaret Fletcher. She's been helping women escape bad situations for years. The men holding these contracts don't know where they are." "Then I'll meet them tomorrow," Alara decided. "If my experience can help them find their own courage, it's the least I can do." The next morning, Alara and Rowan rode into Coldwater together. The safe house was an unassuming building on the edge of town, the kind of place people passed without noticing. Margaret Fletcher answered the door, a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hands that spoke of hard work. "Mrs. Hale," she said warmly, "the women are gathered in the sitting room. They're nervous but eager to meet you." The 7 women ranged in age from barely 18 to mid-30s. They sat together in a small room, their faces showing various stages of fear, hope, and exhaustion. Alara recognized that look, had seen it in her own mirror when she first arrived at Rowan's cabin. "Thank you for coming," one of them said, a young woman with dark hair and a bruise fading on her cheek. "I'm Sarah. The others are Martha, Rebecca, Anne, Clara, Julia, and Elizabeth. We've all heard about your case, about how you fought back. We wanted to hear it from you, how you did it." Alara settled into a chair, Rowan standing quietly behind her. "I ran into a blizzard," she began simply. "I had no plan, no destination, just terror and determination not to be owned. I nearly died. If Rowan hadn't found me, I would have." She told them everything: the escape, the cabin, the hasty marriage, the trial, the ongoing fight for freedom. She didn't sugarcoat the fear or the difficulty, didn't pretend it had been easy or simple. But she also told them about the unexpected love she'd found, the life she'd built, the freedom that made every hardship worthwhile. "Was it worth it?" Rebecca asked. "All the fear, the danger, the trial, was being free worth all of that?" "Yes," Alara said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. Because the alternative, living as property, having no control over my own body or life, that wasn't living. That was existing as someone else's possession. I'd rather face any danger as a free woman than live in safety as a slave." "But you had help," Martha pointed out. "You had Mr. Hale. Most of us have no one. The men holding our contracts have money, power, legal authority. How do we fight that alone?" "You don't fight alone," Margaret interjected. "That's why this house exists. That's why we're organizing, why we're preparing to testify at the Supreme Court hearing. Alone, each of you is vulnerable. Together, you're a movement." "Mrs. Hale," Clara spoke up, her voice trembling. "Will you testify about all of us? Tell the court that your situation wasn't unique, that there are others trapped the same way you were?" "Yes," Alara said. "That's exactly what I plan to do. Your stories matter. Your freedom matters. And I'll fight for it just like I fought for mine." Over the next hour, each woman shared her story. The details varied. Different men, different circumstances, different specific abuses, but the core was the same. Women treated as property, their autonomy stripped away by legal contracts they'd never consented to, their bodies and lives controlled by men who saw them as possessions rather than people. By the time Alara and Rowan left the safe house, she was shaking with rage and renewed determination. Rowan held her as they stood outside, letting her process the weight of what she'd heard. "They're all me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Every one of them is what I would have become if I hadn't run, if you hadn't helped me, if we hadn't fought. And there are probably more we don't even know about." "You're going to help them," Rowan said with certainty. "You're going to stand in front of that court and make them see the truth. And those contracts are going to be outlawed, and those women are going to be free." "How can you be so certain?" "Because I've watched you fight impossible odds and win. Because you're the bravest person I know. Because when you speak truth, people listen." He cupped her face in his hands. "You're going to change the world, Alara, one testimony at a time." The journey to Helena for the Supreme Court hearing felt different from their previous trip. This time, they weren't fighting for their own freedom. They'd already won that. This time, they were fighting for something bigger, something that extended beyond their individual lives to encompass fundamental questions of human rights and dignity. Catherine met them in Helena with a thick folder of documents. The other women, the ones from the safe house, they've agreed to testify too. The court will hear from all of you. It's going to be powerful. The Territorial Supreme Court was more imposing than Judge Morrison's chambers had been. A grand courtroom with high ceilings and ornate woodwork, built to intimidate as much as to serve justice. 3 justices sat at the bench, their expressions grave as they surveyed the packed gallery. The hearing took 2 full days. Legal scholars testified about the history of debt bondage laws, their origins in indentured servitude, and their evolution in American jurisprudence. Economists spoke about the financial structures that made such contracts attractive to wealthy men seeking to exploit the vulnerable. Doctors provided testimony about the physical and psychological damage inflicted on women trapped in these arrangements. But the most powerful testimony came from the women themselves. Sarah, Martha, Rebecca, Anne, Clara, Julia, and Elizabeth each stood before the court and spoke their truth. They detailed the abuse they'd suffered, the helplessness they'd felt, the ways these contracts had stolen their autonomy and dignity. Their voices shook, but they didn't break. Their courage was palpable. And then it was Alara's turn. She took the stand with Rowan's words echoing in her mind. "You're going to change the world," and spoke not just for herself, but for every woman who'd been treated as property. "The contract my father signed didn't just control my labor," she began, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "It controlled my body, my choices, my entire existence. The phrase, 'whatever duties required,' was deliberately vague because everyone understood what it really meant: complete ownership. I wasn't being contracted as a housekeeper. I was being contracted as a possession." She looked directly at the 3 justices. "Some might argue that this was legal under territorial statute, that debt bondage has historical precedent, that the contract was properly executed. But legality isn't the same as justice. Slavery was legal once. That didn't make it right." One of the justices leaned forward. "Mrs. Hale, are you comparing your situation to slavery?" "I'm saying that any system that treats human beings as property to be bought, sold, or contracted, regardless of what we call it, violates fundamental human dignity. Whether we call it slavery, indentured servitude, or debt bondage, the core injustice is the same: one person claiming ownership over another's life and body." She continued, detailing not just her own experience, but connecting it to the broader pattern of exploitation the other women had described. She spoke about the psychological impact of being treated as property, the way it stripped away agency and self-worth. She articulated the systemic issues that allowed such contracts to flourish: the vulnerability of women with limited economic options, the power imbalance between wealthy men and desperate families, the legal frameworks that prioritize property rights over human rights. "The question before this court isn't just whether my individual contract was just," she concluded. "It's whether any human being should ever be subject to such contracts, whether we as a society will continue to allow people to be traded like livestock, or whether we'll finally recognize that human freedom is not negotiable." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even the lawyers seemed at a loss for words. Catherine gave her a small, proud nod as Alara returned to her seat beside Rowan. The justices deliberated for 3 days. 3 days during which Alara and Rowan waited in their boarding house room, anxiety building with each passing hour. The other women from the safe house had stayed in Helena too, all of them bound together by shared experience and shared hope. On the morning of the fourth day, the court reconvened. The gallery was packed with journalists, lawyers, curious citizens, and the women whose futures hung on this decision. Chief Justice William Harlow stood to deliver the ruling. He was an older man with white hair and a face carved by decades of legal battles, known for his careful jurisprudence and, occasionally, his moral courage. This court has considered the matter of debt bondage contracts in Montana Territory with great care, he began. We have reviewed the historical precedents, examined the territorial statutes, and listened to testimony from those directly affected by these arrangements. Our conclusion is unanimous. He paused, and Alara felt Rowan's hand grip hers tightly. These contracts, regardless of their technical legality under existing statute, violate fundamental principles of human dignity and autonomy that must supersede economic considerations. The testimony we've heard makes clear that these agreements were not genuine labor contracts, but thinly veiled systems of ownership that gave one person complete control over another's life and body. Harlow's voice strengthened. The phrase, "whatever duties required," is not merely vague. It is deliberately predatory, designed to grant the contract holder unlimited power while giving the contracted individual no recourse to refuse even the most degrading demands. This court cannot and will not sanction a system that treats human beings as property. Alara felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. Around her, the other women were crying too, hope and disbelief warring on their faces. Therefore, Harlow continued, this court rules that all debt bondage contracts currently in force in Montana Territory are null and void. Furthermore, we are recommending that the territorial legislature pass comprehensive legislation banning such contracts in any form. No economic debt, regardless of size, can justify the surrender of fundamental human freedom. He looked directly at Alara and the other women. The courage you showed in coming forward, in speaking your truth despite the personal cost, has illuminated an injustice that can no longer be ignored. Your testimony has changed law, and we hope will change lives. The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted. Journalists rushed for the doors to file their stories. The women from the safe house were hugging each other, laughing and crying simultaneously. Catherine was grinning with fierce satisfaction, and Rowan pulled Alara into his arms, holding her as she finally let herself feel the full weight of what they'd accomplished. "It's over," she whispered against his chest. "It's really over. They're all free." "You're all free," he corrected, "because of you. Because you were brave enough to speak." "Because we were brave enough," she insisted. "I couldn't have done any of it without you." They stood there in the chaotic courtroom, two people who'd fought impossible odds and won not just their own freedom, but freedom for others. The journey that had started with a desperate flight into a blizzard had ended here, with a Supreme Court ruling that would protect countless women from the fate Alara had escaped. The aftermath of the ruling was swift and far-reaching. The territorial legislature passed the recommended legislation within weeks, with provisions even stronger than the court had suggested. Federal legislators began drafting similar laws, using Montana's legislation as a model. Newspapers across the country ran stories about the case, and Alara found herself becoming a reluctant symbol of women's resistance to oppression. But she and Rowan didn't linger in Helena to bask in the attention. They'd done what needed doing. Now they wanted to go home. The return journey was quiet, both of them processing the enormity of what had happened. They stopped at the safe house in Coldwater on their way, wanting to see the women whose freedom had been secured by the ruling. Margaret Fletcher met them with tears of joy. "They're all gone," she said. "Every single one of them left to start new lives." Sarah went to stay with her sister in Denver. Martha's opening a boarding house. Rebecca's getting married to a man she chose, not one forced on her by contract. They're free, Alara. They're all free because of you. "Because of all of us," Alara corrected, as she always did. "Courage is contagious. We gave it to each other." When they finally arrived back at their cabin, summer was giving way to early autumn. The garden was overgrown from their absence, the chickens indignant at having been left in the neighbor's care. But the cabin stood solid and welcoming, their home waiting for them. They spent the next week settling back into their routine. But everything felt different now. The weight they'd been carrying, the fear of persecution, The anxiety about their marriage's validity, the knowledge that others were still trapped, had finally lifted. They were free, not just legally, but spiritually, released from the battle that had defined their relationship. "What do we do now?" Ilara asked one evening as they sat on the porch Rowan had built, watching the sun set over the mountains. "We spent so long fighting. What do we do when there's nothing left to fight?" "We live," Rowan said simply. "We build. We love. We take all that energy we spent on survival and channel it into actually living." "That sounds terrifying, doesn't it?" He smiled, pulling her close, "but also exciting." "Think about it. We can finally make plans beyond the next crisis. We can dream about the future without fear hanging over us." "What do you dream about?" "Growing old with you, watching seasons change from this porch, maybe teaching you to carve. You've shown interest in my woodworking, expanding the cabin more if we need it. Having friends visit without worrying they're coming to arrest you." He paused. "Maybe even a family, if that's something you want." Ilara was quiet for a moment, letting herself imagine that future, children running through the meadow, laughter filling the cabin, a life not just survived but fully, joyfully lived. "I want that," she said softly. "All of it, with you. Then we'll build it, together, just like everything else." The following spring, Ilara discovered she was pregnant. The news brought a tangle of emotions: joy, fear, excitement, anxiety about whether she was ready for motherhood. But Rowan's steady presence anchored her, and slowly the fear gave way to anticipation. "What if I'm not a good mother?" she asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You'll be an excellent mother. You're strong, brave, kind, and you know how to fight for what matters. Those are exactly the qualities a child needs." "I don't have a good example to follow. My mother died when I was 12, and my father was a cautionary tale about what not to do." "But Ilara, you're not your parents. You're you. Someone who chose freedom over safety, who stood up for not just herself but others, who built a life from nothing because she refused to accept what others tried to force on her. Our child will be lucky to have you." Their daughter was born in December, during the first major snowstorm of winter. Margaret Fletcher came to assist with the birth, along with a doctor from Coldwater. The labor was long and difficult, but when Ilara finally held her daughter, all the pain disappeared into overwhelming love. "What should we name her?" Rowan asked, looking at his daughter with wonder. Ilara thought about all the women who'd fought alongside her, all the courage that had brought them to this moment. "Hope," she said. "Her name is Hope." "Hope Hale," Rowan murmured, testing it out. "It's perfect." As winter deepened and they learned to be parents together, fumbling through diaper changes and midnight feedings, and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a tiny human, Ilara sometimes thought about the journey that had brought them here, the blizzard that nearly killed her, the stranger who saved her, the hasty marriage that became genuine love, the legal battles that changed laws and freed others. Every step had been necessary. Every hardship had led to this: a family built on choice and courage, a home created from determination and love, a life that was fully, completely theirs. When Hope was 6 months old, Catherine visited with news that the federal government had passed legislation based on Montana's law, banning debt bondage contracts nationwide. The fight Ilara had started in her desperate flight from ownership had rippled outward, changing laws across the country. "You should be proud," Catherine said, watching Hope play on the floor. "What you started, it's protecting women you'll never meet, in places you'll never go. That's the definition of making a difference." "I just wanted to be free," Ilara said, echoing words she'd spoken before. "I never meant to become a symbol. The best symbols never do. They're just people brave enough to stand up and say no when everyone else accepts injustice as inevitable." Catherine smiled at Hope. "And now you're raising the next generation to be just as brave." After Catherine left, Ilara stood at the window with Hope in her arms, looking out at the mountains that had become home. Rowan came up behind them, wrapping his arms around them both. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That life is strange and beautiful and terrifying. That I started out running from one man who thought he owned me, and I ended up finding a man who taught me I could never be owned by anyone. That I went from having nothing to having everything." She leaned back against him. "That I'm happy. Really, truly happy." "Me too," he said softly. For the first time in 8 years, I'm not just surviving, I'm thriving because of you, because of us, because of this life we built together." Hope made a cooing sound, grabbing at her mother's hair, and they both laughed. It was such a simple, domestic moment, the kind that would have been impossible to imagine during those first desperate days. But here they were, living it. Years passed. Hope grew into a bright, curious child who asked endless questions and showed early signs of her mother's fierce independence. The cabin expanded again to accommodate a growing family. A son named Thomas arrived 2 years after Hope, and twin girls named Sarah and Emma 3 years after that. The names were deliberate choices, honoring both the mother Alara had lost and the family Rowan had grieved. Their homestead became a gathering place for the community. Alara continued teaching, now in a small schoolhouse the town built specifically for her classes. Rowan trained other men in mountain survival skills, passing on knowledge he'd accumulated during his years of isolation. Together, they created a life that was both deeply private and meaningfully connected to the world around them. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they rode out to the spot where Alara had collapsed that winter night a decade ago. The landscape looked different in summer, lush and green instead of frozen and deadly, but the memory was still vivid. "Sometimes I can't believe this is real," Alara said, standing at the place where her old life had ended and her new one had begun. "That I survived that night, found you, fought for freedom and won. It feels like something from a story, not real life." "It was real. It is real. Every hard-won moment of it." Rowan took her hand. "And you didn't just survive, Alara. You transformed. From a woman running from ownership to a woman who owns her own destiny. From someone seeking freedom to someone who helped others find theirs. From my unexpected wife to the love of my life." "The love of my life," she repeated, testing the words. "Yes, that's what you are. That's what you've always been, even when I was too scared or confused to name it. I spent 6 years thinking I'd used up all my chances at love, that Sarah and Emma were it, and everything after would just be empty time before death. Then you collapsed at my door, half frozen and completely stubborn, and woke me back to life." He pulled her into his arms. "You gave me a reason to live again, Alara. Not just survive, but actually live. That's a gift I can never adequately repay. You don't have to repay it. You give it back to me every day, every morning when you kiss me goodbye before heading to work, every evening when you listen to me talk about my students, every night when you hold me and make me feel safe and loved and seen. That's what partnership is. That's what we built." They stood there together, two people who'd been broken in different ways and had somehow become whole by choosing each other. The mountains rose around them, eternal and beautiful and harsh. But they'd learned to thrive here, to make a home in the wilderness, to build something lasting from the ashes of their old lives. 10 years ago, Alara had run into a blizzard with nothing but terror and determination. She'd found a stranger in a cabin, married him out of desperation, fought for their freedom in court, and changed laws that affected countless women. It had been a journey defined by courage and choice, by refusing to accept what others tried to force on her, by believing that freedom was worth any cost. And now, standing beside the man who'd saved her life and became her partner in all things, with 4 children waiting at home and a community that respected them both, she understood the most important truth of all. Freedom wasn't just the absence of chains, it was the presence of choice, the daily decision to build a life worth living, to stand beside someone who saw you as an equal, to face the world with courage and love. She was free. She was loved. She was home. And the story that had begun with a woman running from ownership had become a story of 2 people owning their destiny, together, completely, irrevocably. Their lives, their land, their future. All of it fully and beautifully their own. As the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Rowan and Alara turned toward home. Toward the cabin they'd expanded together, the garden she'd planted, the children waiting for their return, toward the life they'd fought for and won, toward everything they'd chosen, together. And that choice, repeated every day in 1,000 small ways, remained the most powerful thing of all.